Okay, I am going to call the study session to order now. We do have a quorum of county board members in the room. And would the clerk please call the roll?
Here.
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 Jay? Here. Kibler? Maxwell?
Here.
McGuire? Michael? Here. Mitchell?
Here.
Quisenberry?
Here.
Rosales?
Here.
Schrader? Schwartz? Shore?
Here.
Weibel? Alex?
Here.
Anderson? Here. Bergson? Carter? And Peter?
Here, and Mr. Kibler is also here. I put my glasses on here, okay. A motion to approve the agenda for the evening, please. Mr. Jay and Mr. Esri seconded the motion. Any changes or questions on the agenda? All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right, the agenda has been approved. Again, would the clerk please read the notice of the meeting?
Notice is hereby given that a study session of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on February the 24th, 2015 at 6:00 p.m. in the Lyle Shields Meeting Room, Brookings Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street, Urbana, Illinois, for the purpose of the presentation of the Sheriff's Operations Master Plan.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to have, if the clerk will notice, Ms. Schwartz has arrived for the meeting. We're going to have the presentation of the Sheriff's Operation Master Plan first, and this will be followed by questions from the County Board. After that, we are going to have a 10-minute recess, and when we come back from recess, we are going to go into the public participation, and at that time, I will describe how we are going to be handling the public participation for this evening. So would our consultants please come up to the table with the microphone? And do you need any assistance with setting up? It's all set, all right.
So these arrows right there, okay. Good evening. Thanks for inviting us tonight to talk about the Part 2 of the Sheriff's Operations Master Plan. I'm Chuck Riefsteck with Gorski Riefsteck Architects. Also here is Dennis Kimmey with Kimmey & Associates, and Jim Gleason with GHR Engineers, and behind us two other fellows from my staff, Kevin Price and Sean Bott. I'd like to thank all the participants that helped us with this study, including a lot of the sheriff's staff and county administrators, and spent a lot of time with them, a lot of time in the facilities, and we appreciate their help. So the basic charge to us when we got started back in June of last year was to identify the facility shortcomings, the problems, and the issues, and then provide a comprehensive response to those problems and issues in the form of a master plan. With that master plan, then providing cost estimates so that you could plan for future improvements. And we did the work in two parts, with the first part focusing more on the downtown facility. And so then back in October, presented part one, and the county board at that time voted to no longer consider the downtown facility for corrections operations, but we would still look at it through part two as law enforcement solution, perhaps. Okay.
Thanks, Chuck. And part where we started the project was recognition of the fact that there were prior studies that were done before we got started. And there were a variety of relevant findings from those previous studies. And the previous studies were done by the NIC, which stands for National Institute of Corrections, ILPP, the Institute for Law and Policy Planning, and then the CJTF, which is the Criminal Justice Task Force. And you'll note that we have multiple references to page numbers, and that's so if you want to go into the report itself, that's where you see that information residing in the report. So for example, the previous studies are summarized in terms of relevant facility-related findings on pages 35 to 37. Okay. One of the early findings was a report by NIC, and they reported what they called depressing and deplorable conditions at the downtown jail. They reported that the downtown jail was staff inefficient and fundamentally unsafe, and they recommended that it be closed now. And that recommendation was made both by NIC and ILPP. NIC and ILPP recommended that the jail be consolidated at the satellite facility site. They recommended that out there we add segregation and special needs housing, and that was ILPP's recommendation, to address what they identified as the principal housing difficulties at the existing facilities, or shortcomings, if you will. They also recommended, or ILPP also recommended, that we double the staff at the satellite housing pods, given the density of those pods in terms of numbers of people. NIC recommended that we comply not only with Illinois standards, but the standards of the American Correctional Association. A key recommendation by ILPP was that we improve the inmate classification system and we create a housing plan in response to that classification system. The Criminal Justice Task Force said that if new space was built, the focus should be on behavioral and healthcare-related space. ILPP also addressed the law enforcement space issue, though not near as much as they did the jail issue. But they basically concluded that there was insufficient room at the downtown facility to accommodate needed law enforcement center expansion. And then both ILPP and the NIC recommended that the next step in the process was to develop a facility master plan, which in essence is what this study's about. Now, there were a couple interesting follow-up actions by the county per the previous study findings and recommendations. One significant thing that occurred was in response to the deficiencies at the downtown jail with respect to female inmates. They recommended that they be moved to the satellite jail, which in fact occurred. They're in Pod A at this time, and there are no females in the downtown jail. Two of the downtown housing units were literally opened up, the doors opened up, to reward the general population, or really what are the good behaving inmates, so to speak, with movement freedom. And some of that movement freedom not only included free movement between two adjacent housing pods, but to spaces like library and recreation. And then lastly, and probably I think one of the most significant things in terms of what we're doing and what the jail staff is doing now at your two facilities, is that a new inmate classification system was adopted, and that was adopted with the help of a national specialist recommended by ILPP. So after ILPP was done, there was an additional body of work that the county paid for to bring in this specialist and help the jail create this new classification system. Now, our starting point was what's the existing bed capacity we have to work with. It's commonly considered to have 313 beds between the two existing jails. 131 was the downtown rating that people are familiar with, and 182 at the satellite jail. Now, that interestingly includes 59 bunks that were added to the original designs to address past overcrowding. But when those, and this is part of the problem with these facilities, when those bunks were added, that additional capacity was added, additional showers, dayroom space, classroom, support space was not added with it. And that speaks to a lot of the fundamental issues that you have at those facilities in terms of lacking those things in those areas. So essentially what happened is that we crowded existing housing on a permanent basis to address the overcrowding problem that the county faced. Now, not all existing housing is appropriate to the inmate classifications involved per the classification system, particularly single occupancy cells, that's one person per cell or detention room, is needed for disciplinary detainees, maximum custody inmates, protective custody, medical isolation, and some mental health categories. The satellite jail, by design, however, is only 4% single occupancy. And as a side note, I'd point out that the American Correctional Association in their standards recommends a minimum of 10% of all housing be single occupancy. Now, if we apply current standards, because again, remember, we're going to be making significant changes to these buildings, so just for that reason alone, we're probably going to be subject to current standards, though we would recommend that we subject ourselves to that anyway if we're creating a long-term master plan. We don't operate substandard facilities. But if we apply a current standards and the inmate classification system and some of those single occupancy assumptions we've talked about, that cuts your 313 beds down to 236. So that's what we kind of considered our starting point as we looked at creating new options for the county. Now, some jail data that we used that informed some of these issues, particularly on the classification side, that was generated from the new classification system and the efforts of the staff in collecting data on inmate classifications. Based on a snapshot that we did of the jail population in the middle of last year, 28% of the population was charged with a first degree or a Class X felony, which carries with it a 20-year minimum sentence if convicted on those charges. 75% of the inmates had felony charge or conviction. 86% of the inmates had 2 or more arrests, with the average being 11.1 arrests per inmate. Only 11% of the inmates in the jail were sentenced. And then less than 10% of the population was female. So it's largely an adult male jail. Combined, jail average daily population was 225 for the 4 years of 2010 and 13 for which we had detailed data. An interesting note on that is without the electronic home detention program, based on the numbers of that program over that time frame, we'd have 35 more inmates in our jail facilities had we not instituted that program. And probably another interesting bit of perspective, particularly for the new members who maybe aren't familiar with the jail problem, if we look back 15 years ago, the jail population actually was about 100 more inmates per day than it is today. So there's been a significant reduction over the last 15 years. In 2013, just looking at that in particular, the average was 221. But more interesting to us from a planning point of view was that they had a peak day of 267, or roughly 21% higher than that average. And the lows and the highs, an example, to show you the extremes of the population they deal with. The male population in 2013 was as low as 146, but as high as 241. Females as low as 11 and as high as 31. And that poses interesting operational challenges to the staff and interesting planning challenges to us to deal with those fluctuations. So the real import of that is that the housing plans, which are one of the key things asked for in the master plan study, must accommodate the peaks, not just the averages. It's the peak numbers that are more relevant to us. Now this chart here kind of gives you an idea of how over the years 2010 through 2013, which at the point we stopped doing data collection left us with our last complete years. How do I get my arrow working here, Chuck? Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah. What you see in the blue, as an example, are the annual averages. And of course, that's what most of us hear about, and that's what most of us react to when we're thinking about jail issues. The red lines, however, actually represent the daily counts that the staff had to deal with. So you see great variety and great fluctuation which they deal with. Now, these numbers are superimposed over this line, which represents that classification system-based capacity, standards-based capacity we're talking about. So if you operate those facilities consistent with your classification system and modified to meet standards, you can see that there are in fact many days that the population exceeded that 236 line. Brief Part 1 study recap then. The downtown facility has major repair, update, and maintenance issues. It must close 1 year to be fixed. We agreed that the conditions there are depressing and deplorable, and it is a facility that's hard to manage and to ensure safety and security. The cell blocks there were where most severe overcrowding by adding extra bunks actually occurred. Basically, we had a body of single occupancy cells in that building originally, and virtually every one of them was double occupied to respond to crowding. And law enforcement area, not to forget it, it's easy to talk just about the jail, but that's an equal part of this study, really suffers from critical space shortages, particularly in the area of evidence storage and record storage, and has a very disorganized layout from our point of view. The downtown cell blocks can be redesigned. We did a lot of study work. If you look back at the study, you'll see we studied different options for if that could be reconfigured and solve the problems were identified by NIC and ILPP. They can be redesigned in certain ways, but not for the special housing needs that we have. So we can fix it, but not fix it for the right populations. And there actually is no satellite housing area either that we found suitable or modifiable for the special needs populations. And the downtown jail, to us, was fundamentally not staff efficient and never can be as efficient as consolidated jail expansion pods would be. The Part 1 conclusion then, we finished our Part 1 report on October 7 with a presentation to the Facilities Committee, followed up by an October 23 presentation to the full county board. And after long discussion, we got direction from the county board of how to proceed to this point in time. And that was first, cease examining the downtown as a jail solution. In other words, stop looking at that for jail fixes, but continue to examine a law enforcement solution at both the downtown and the satellite jails. So, presenting tonight then, the real core of what tonight's presentation is, we looked at two options. The first option was jail renovation addition at the satellite jail site, and then law enforcement renovation at the downtown site. Option 2, jail renovation addition at the satellite jail site. In essence, the same solution as option 1 from a jail point of view. So the solution is the same on option 1 and 2 for the jail. But the difference in option 2 really applies to law enforcement, where we looked at an addition attached to the satellite jail. Now, the objectives that we had behind the options that we created were first to propose long-term solutions, not short-term, and that the jail essentially stays around the 313 bed mark that we have today. We want to, in what our answers, we wanted to reinforce the Champaign County Sheriff's Office mission statement. It's on their website if you want to look at it. They have a clean, clear mission statement as to what they want to achieve in the jail, as well as the objectives of the inmate classification system. We, foremost, wanted to address the major jail housing needs we had, particularly the special needs and the female capabilities. We wanted to improve safety, security, environmental conditions. If you've had a chance to review our evaluations of the two facilities, there's a lot of safety and security and conditions issues that we cited that needed to be fixed. We want to solve specific identified building and support problems in a comprehensive way. We want to do that per the past studies and reports that were done, not to waste that. And those were not only the studies of NIC, ILPP, CJTF, but also engineers. If you look back, we have had studies by different engineering groups of the different systems of the buildings. But also problems that we identified by walkthroughs of our architectural staff, engineering staff, and corrections staff. We also did a problem identification exercise with the operating staff of the facility, let them put their 2 cents in and find out what kind of issues they wanted resolved. And then also we had a series of planning team meetings where we worked out concepts and ideas that we would then develop into options. Now, when we did our presentation in October, we principally talked about the downtown facility. So I wanted to review with you the satellite deficiencies, or some of the major ones that we were starting with. First, we did see that there were major housing challenges there. If you go in there, there are blind spots, there are view conflicts. It's an entirely double-tier operation, which basically means you have cells, and you can kind of see it in that picture. I don't know if you can pick that up very well. But you have cells stacked on top of cells with an adjoining 2-story day space, and then a walkway on the second tier that brings you down a stairway to the bottom core. And then again, only 4% of the occupancy was single occupancy. Everything was double and dorm. And from our point of view, that kind of housing posed safety and security challenges to it, and it certainly was unsuitable for our special needs and female inmates. The intake booking area was a big one, that it was too small. It's poorly organized, inconsistent really with the mission and classification system objectives that have evolved in the county. Insufficient medical health clinic and mental health space. No indoor exercise. We have outdoor, but no indoor. Lacks adequate space for professional and video visiting. Insufficient space for inmate programming. Insufficient scattered administration space. And Jim will talk about some of this later, Jim Gleason. Mechanical systems inadequate there. It uses a lot of energy, requires frequent repairs and updates. So while we were condemning heavily the downtown jail, it wasn't as though there weren't issues at the satellite jail that we had to address as well. Now, the jail housing proposed as part of both of the jail options. First, the goal was to provide safer beds that we thought were more responsive to inmate needs rather than more beds overall. Also, we talked a lot about having housing concepts that were flexible enough to meet whatever changing needs and dynamic that we had in the population, because it rarely stays the same all the time. 307 beds total were proposed at the satellite site. That consisted of existing housing, 143 of the 307 beds, and we start with 182, but again, per the classification and the safety and security concerns and the standard concerns, the 182 was dropped to 143. The replacement, the new housing, provides 164 of the 307 beds, focusing on the special needs and female-male flexible use housing pod, and also an idea that was generated during the planning discussions with staff, what we called a pre-classification and 0 to 72-hour pod. And that's basically to support the classification system, where we have our new inmates stay, where they can be observed and met with by the classification staff as they do their assessment, but also a place where we recognize there's a lot of inmates that are there for short stays after their arrest. After they go to arraignment court or whatever, they're right back out the door, and we wanted to minimize their penetration into the facility and their contact with other inmates in the facility. The 307 beds then, in our minds, accommodates the overall and the subgroup peaks that we were talking about in finding. It raises the single occupancy capability of the facility from 4% to 22%. And again, a single occupancy to us is better per the classification system. It's better for safety, security, property protection, and accountability. However, we still think that even though we got 22% out of it, better would be about 35%. But we're trying to find a balance in the project. And really, again, the percentage is limited by the fact that the existing satellite jail is principally a multiple occupancy design. From our point of view, if for whatever reason your average daily population declines, that's a good thing for internal operations, because what that allows us to do is convert more of those double occupancy cells to what we think is the more operationally desirable single occupancy usage. Now, we always have to recognize in planning, although there were not projections done here, ILPP was to have addressed that in the study previously, there are always growth pressures, and you have to be prepared for that. So the kind of things that you have with growth is always, county growth itself can drive growth in populations and law changes. So we always have to be lookout on what might change in the law. Just as a side note, county is projected to grow by 15.3% between 2010 and 2030 as an example of potential growth. Now, one of the key things that we tried to address were jail support space needs. This wasn't just about housing based on the deficiencies we found. But we wanted to address not only those deficiencies, but the additional needs that were generated by the fact that we were consolidating populations at a single place. The critical components that we tried to address were things like program, classroom, counseling, and indoor exercise space, community mental health, reentry, electronic home detention, space for all of that, visitation, which is a variety of types, video visitation, non-contact, which is what prevails there principally, and also what was really lacking there, contact, professional, and or family visiting, which we're still discussing how that mix ought to be. But intake, holding, and release space, booking area in other words, medical and mental health care space, and classification, and those things really are linked. In working with the staff, we discovered that the classification staff actually spends the majority of their time working with the medical and mental health staff as they're assessing the inmates and trying to identify what's the best way to respond to their needs. So that's actually clustered in the facility. Administration and staff support space, laundry and storage. And then we're also recommending a small block of unassigned space for those things we can't predict now but might come in the future. And as you look at the space breakdown, and again, we don't expect you to read through this list, it's in the document, but what we did is we did a documentation of the different components like master control, programs, sally port, video appearance, kitchen, et cetera. How much square footage was assigned to those things in the downtown design, how much was assigned to the existing satellite design, and what that totaled up to be. And that was about 36,974 square footage. Based on our projections of need for the options that we developed, we wound up with 37,000 square feet, or virtually the same amount. And we're actually doing more with that 37,000 than the existing 37,000, and I think that's principally a benefit of consolidating the space and getting more out of it that way. Now, law enforcement, again, don't want to forget that. Space needs, there are inadequacies there that we wanted to address. The really critical components that we needed to address in the plan were the evidence processing and storage space, which right now exists, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sheriff, 7 or 8 spaces you have it in now. record storage, which is also in 7 or 8 spaces. And the principal part of that is actually not in the law enforcement area, it's down in the jail. So the only way that the clerical staff can get at it is to go down the elevator, penetrate and get permission from the master control officer to get into the jail perimeter, and do the kind of thing that we never recommend anybody do, which is actually penetrate your master control center to find their way into the records area, which is highly inefficient and really bad protocol from a security point of view. Classrooms and tactical training for the staff, and then also staff locker space. Other components that we addressed but weren't near a critical condition was investigations, patrol and staff facilities, administration and clerical, and the lobby. From a law enforcement point of view, mainly because we're looking at better space and principally more space in the training area, we're going from an existing level of about 17,000 to projecting a need of about 23,000 in either option 1 or option 2. There are little subtle variations there, and that has more to do with working with available space in an existing building versus creating new space, more tailored for what we need. This is a diagram of the site then of the option 1 solution. Again, if you can see the arrow, this is the existing part of the building, demarcated by this orange line. This is the new addition concept that we were testing. And this is oriented to the north at the top. So this is Learman Road here, and right now this is the way in which everybody gets into the site, whether they're visitors, staff, or patrol officers with arrestees. And what we're suggesting is that the parking for the staff needs to be added in option 1, parking for the public needs to be added in option 1, and that we actually approach the site from a different area because we want to create a new intake area and use the old intake area for other needs that we have related to lobby and lobby connections. But this would basically be a new access off Bartell Road that would take us to the new Sallyport and loop around. Okay. Option 2 then principally differs in the fact, not in the jail concept, but in the fact that we'd be adding a law enforcement center and shifting the emphasis on parking so that the existing parking lots in the front would remain as they are, just that the staff parking would be redesignated additional public parking, and that new separated staff parking would be built to the north of the facility or somewhere in the area. The building would have to be done in phases. The first phase would be the addition itself to the facility, and the principal parts of that are basically the special needs housing, what we're calling a female-male flex housing pod. And the reason those two are combined is because there's so much fluctuation in the female group and it's such a small number that it would be highly staff efficient to just try to base something on a female group alone. So we're trying to have an efficient group. It'll be a cute design, but because you want to create a view and sound control between the two different areas. But it would be much more staff efficient to do that way and much more flexible in terms of the changing proportion of those populations. The new pre-classification 0 to 72-hour housing unit would be here, adjacent to a new intake area, so as those people come in, they immediately move laterally to that area. If they're short stays, they get to go right back out the other area. I lost my arrow, there we go. Other critical component then would be a medical, mental health, and classification block, and then additional program space with a logical area for additional pod if we need that for whatever reason. Now again, the phase 2 then would be the jail renovations, so we'd be able to move people around into the new space after we get the new space. And again, this applies equally to option 1 and 2 with just one small difference. In the housing pods, the big changes in that are to take what is the staff control position, which kind of inexplicably was pushed to the side in the original design, and put it where it ought to be in the center of the pod, where all the sight lines converge. If you can see all these dividing walls of the day rooms in the jail, they converge on that center point. So rather than have the staff off in the corner, move it more to the middle where it sees much more, and therefore, is more able to respond to things, see things, react to things. That'd be the same between both of the pods. Both of the pods were done that way, and I can explain why I think they did it. Just so you know, if anybody's interested. But the side note is the original concept they had, which I'm not sure to what degree they actually discussed it with the staff, because at the end of the day, staff never did it the way they designed it, which was they thought that center core would be an excellent space to run programs. However, if you're running AA or any kind of programs where, it's personal, it's conversational, you have private matters going on, whatever, you don't want to be doing it in full view of 80 other inmates. So as a consequence, they never ever used it that way, which is one of the reasons why we lacked classroom and program space in there. So it was one of those ideas that just didn't work. So they designed it for that control center in the middle, all those lines of sight, but then they pushed it back so they have what they thought was multipurpose program space. The other thing, we have outdoor exercise space there, but as you can tell, like a day like today and days like today, it doesn't get used. And exercise is a very crucial component for the inmate population, for their mental and their medical health, or their well-being. So the proposal here is to take that outdoor space and subdivide it and actually create indoor spaces in both of those pods. A key part is the programs, and we have a really nice flow here when you come into the lobby area, control, and then they have a classroom space here. But right now, that's a captain's office, that's the lieutenant's office, and this is the healthcare clinic, which is far too small. So as you noted in phase one, we were talking about a new healthcare area. So the idea is basically to create a new jail administrative area, those new healthcare areas, so that we can take all of this in the middle in green and make that program area, which is under the backup watchful eye of master control, but also is an easy, simple movement pattern for service providers to get in the facility, given that this is where the lobby is and where those access points are. When we look at renovating the facilities, then, this is where the existing booking and intake area is. And the lobby is a key part of it. We need more jail administration. Jail administration right now is a little space here, a little space there, a little space here, very disorganized and lacking in space, so we want to consolidate it in a true jail administrative area off the lobby where they can interact with all the people who come from the outside that have business with jail administration, but have access back into the jail into the main perimeter of the jail. Visiting needs to be expanded. Right now, this is the only space that's available for visiting, and it's non-contact, and the video visiting stations are kind of just stuffed in the public side of that. So this concept, this test concept, and again, I know this looks like real hardball architecture, but right now it's just test concepts, to be examined and verified in the future. The idea, though, is to create a true video visiting area with appropriate video visiting stations, but then also to have a significant element for that professional contact visiting, whether the contact is with an attorney, whether it's somebody in the reentry program, whether it's electronic home detention officer, whomever it is that wants to have a private meeting, interview with clients, either in groups or individually, to provide that capability. And in that regard, then, relocate electronic home detention here, the reentry program here, and community elements here, where they have access to the jail perimeter, but also to these contact visiting spaces. Okay. And then the last block, one of the things that we really lack in this building, it's an oft ignored type of thing, is storage. There's almost no storage in this building. All the storage really is at the downtown jail. It's in the vacated work release area. So everything that the satellite jail needs has to be pulled out of the downtown jail and brought down here. Well, we're not going to have a downtown jail anymore, so we need a significantly increased storage capability, and that's what we propose to go in that corner, where we can double duty the old Sally Port as additional storage and the delivery point. Okay. I should say up in this area, the main difference between 1 and 2 is right in option 2, because we're bringing law enforcement out here and we can share some capabilities, we proposed taking what is the inadequate locker area, particularly for the male staff, move that to the law enforcement center so that we can pick up additional dry goods storage for the kitchen, which they're lacking, commissary space, which they're lacking, and then can take the refrigerator and freezer and move it into what is the dry goods storage area now, and give the increased kitchen space that they'll need long-term in that area. Okay. Now, as far as renovating downtown in option 1 for the jail, the key part of that is the downtown jail must be closed for 12 months. And we should also plan on 15 months of renting space, since we're probably going to have to modify space wherever we rent before we get in there and occupy it. Roughly speaking, based on what they have today, about minimum of 17,000 square feet of rental space needed for the sheriff. And again, Chuck and his staff explored some options in terms of things that are available now. But when we actually get to that point in time, we don't know what's available, so we have to be ready for the fact that there's either minor or major modifications to the available rental space which will be a cost. We don't know what that'll be at this stage. And again, those costs can vary widely. And then the particular challenges we'd have to confront in rental space from a law enforcement point of view is to have secure space for evidence, emergency power generation, and high-tech communication connections and networks. We'll have to pay the costs of 2 moves, and then we'll also have to pay whatever utilities are at that rental space and in addition to the utilities we're paying at the existing buildings. Okay. In terms of law enforcement on the upper level, not too much will change there. Not that this is perfect up here. I mean, if we're doing new, we'd certainly do a lot of this different, and we're proposing that in the new option. But right now, all we're talking about is taking what was the original evidence area, getting all the evidence that's out of there, and turning that into an investigative suite or adding to the investigative suite's capabilities, and then getting out of that business of having records down in the jail next to master control and taking what are the inadequate locker and records area, or not adequate locker areas and briefing staff break areas that are here, opening that up to the clerical area and making that the new records area. Right now, this is really awkwardly designed because even when patrol staff use it, they actually have to walk out into the lobby before they can get back in and have meetings in the sheriff's side. As far as the basement then, that's where we'd have the biggest changes. This area here is what was the old work release dormitory, and this is where, for example, we thought we could put the locker space that we dislocated up above, take care of training staff and office and training space in the lavender areas, a brand new consolidated evidence storage area, and in the green, found and confiscated property. So right now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, this is their current vehicle drive-through Sallyport. Everything above there is now jail. So based on the vacation of the jail, we're proposing that to meet the sheriff's needs, we need to get into what is jail space, do a lot of demolition of walls, and do a lot of renovation in those areas to make it work. Jail staffing estimates is one of our tasks. If you recall, that was a big issue. We forecast staff savings in our Part 1 report. What we've been able to validate from these options in our minds is that the option that we're proposing will save 7.7 full-time equivalent staff over current adequate staffing. And if you project that out based on current salary and fringe rates using 2.5% inflation per year over 20 years, we estimate that's about $10.5 million saved and $410,000 in the first year. Plus, even though we're saving money on staff, we're actually getting a better deal operationally. The facilities will be safer, they'll be more secure, we'll be accommodating more programs and services in those facilities, even though we have the fewer staff. Roughly speaking, when you look at it in terms of an average daily population to staff ratio, a way to boil it down is we think we're being 20% more efficient overall with the changes recommended. As far as the schedule is concerned then, option 1, of course, we don't know how the schedule will play out because there's obviously decisions you have to make, timing that's related to that. But just assuming things go in a certain pattern here, just as for example, to compare the two options, we're looking at first starting off with the precast panel investigations issue, which has been in front of you, programming and schematic design phase, design development construction document phase, bid negotiation, and then a phase 1 jail addition, phase 2 renovate the satellite jail, which I've shown you, and then the phase 3 downtown renovation, which has to happen after all of that. So on this schedule, you're not complete until June 2020 with everything, although you're getting pieces of things to work with before then. Option 2, we don't have that phase 3 renovation of the downtown jail, and the estimate is complete by August 2019. One of the things that you asked us to do was not only give you dollars, but just qualitative pros and cons to different things. So option 1, pros and cons, which you can find on page 184. The pros, as we see it, is that option 1 addresses the jail housing needs, addresses the jail program and support needs, resolves jail security, safety, and standards shortcomings that we had identified, changes the character, and I think this is important, of the key intake release area consistent with the sheriff's mission and with direct supervision concept, which was recommended by ILPP, and also the new classification system that's been instituted. It allows for easy future jail expansion. It's a more staff-efficient jail. It addresses the critical, but not all, law enforcement space problems. The cons for option 1, law enforcement must rent for 15 months and then the rental space must overcome the technology obstacles we noted. Takes 10 months longer to do than option 2. Really fitting law enforcement functions into some of those oddly shaped jail spaces, really in our mind results in kind of a mediocre, still segmented solution between 2 floors and 2 halves of 1 floor as it's subdivided by that sally port. Future law enforcement expansion is problematic because of that, and also if we use the remaining jail space for other things, because now we have competing functions in that same building that limits what you can do at law enforcement expansion. We have to renovate, maintain, and heat that vacated jail if we don't have an occupant for it. The sheriff is totally separate now from the jail that he's the chief administrator of the jail, was all said and done. No offense, Carrie, but even though Carrie runs it day to day, the sheriff in fact is the guy in charge of it right now. And right now he's at least located with the downtown jail, but now we'd be splitting him from everything related to the jail. And there's really no room on that site downtown for additional parking. I mean, the parking that's there is inadequate, but it is what it is, and there's no room for more. Now, as far as option 2, the pros, they're essentially the same as option 1. The 1 through 6 are essentially the same, plus there's no need to close the downtown and rent. It's a faster project overall. We address all of the law enforcement space problems, have easy law enforcement expansion if that's ever needed. We get to share training space and staff locker and break room space between law enforcement and jail staff, which is also a good thing from a camaraderie point of view. The law enforcement presence on the site adds a quick emergency jail backup capability. If there's a real issue at the jail, we can draw the law enforcement staff that are right there attached to the building. We have ample land to meet all parking needs for public and staff, ample land for future consolidation of law enforcement vehicles. If, for example, we want to change the way that we store our vehicles for whatever reason, we have space on that site to bring them to the site. And it also allows the option of selling the downtown facility and offsetting some of the costs of option 2. Cons of option 2, we must find a user for the vacated downtown building, if it's still there, or find a buyer for it. If no buyer is found, we have to bear the cost of maintenance or demolishing the building itself. And even though the sheriff noted this is probably a lesser issue, there still would be more travel for the public who's doing business both at the courthouse and then at the sheriff's office at the same time. They have to go to 2 different sites to do it. Okay, utilities cost comparison, I'll turn it over to Jim.
So what this slide does is show you the relative utility cost between the 2 options. In the option 1 cost, that number includes, for the downtown facility, includes heating and cooling a renovated downtown facility. But as one of the earlier slides alluded, there's much more space there than the sheriff needs. So we're really conditioning space that doesn't have any occupants, which drags down these numbers. The satellite figures that you see there include modifications to the existing satellite systems, and it includes geothermal utility costs for the addition. When we go to option 2, those figures, of course, the downtown facility falls out of the equation. In this scenario, both the satellite jail addition and the sheriff's addition are geothermal, and we have the upgraded systems in existing systems in the satellite. So you see significantly less dollars being spent on utilities. And then finally, this slide simply compares option 2 with option 1. And then I believe you'll see that the savings of option 2 over the existing are significant, which reflects in part the inefficiencies of the existing satellite systems. Existing satellite systems need some energy improvements, let's just put it that way. We'll be talking about that a little bit in our next slide.
So in our review of the facilities as buildings, there are certain items that need to be done immediately, really, and in the case of the downtown facility, to hold it in a holding pattern for 3 years until major renovations can happen or that it's abandoned. Downtown, we've assigned some costs. We've got to fix some roof leaks right now. There's active leaks going on, and there's some problems with the emergency generator that need to be repaired. At the satellite, of course, there's a problem with the panels that needs to be repaired, probably quickly. As Jim mentioned before, like to do some things to start reducing energy consumption at that facility right now. There's also some jail security and intercom issues that need to happen, and a new roof needs to go on the satellite building as well. Now, so we're calling this kind of our maintenance projects that has to happen, really ought to happen before the major renovations that Dennis laid out before and additions. And the total cost of those maintenance projects is about $2.7 million. Now, construction costs for the two options that we've laid out. As Dennis mentioned, the satellite jail additions and renovations are nearly identical in options 1 and 2. The only difference in option 2 being a little additional renovation to accommodate and account for the fact that law enforcement would be added to that building. And we're estimating the cost in today's dollars for construction of around $21.1 to $21.2 million. The law enforcement solution, downtown, of course, we have renovation costs. We also have the cost of relocating and improving tenant space for the sheriff for 15 months. And the total of those, 4.1 million and 1.6 million is roughly 5.7 million, for a total construction cost of option 1 of 26.8 million. In option 2, be new law enforcement spaces of roughly $6.2 million for a total estimated cost in today's dollars of $27.3 million. Now, construction cost is only part of the story. You also have a certain number of soft costs that go with any construction project. Those include pre-construction testing, construction testing, architectural and engineering fees, surveys, insurance, moving, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and several other items as well. And we're estimating those for both options at about $3.4 million. So we come up then with a total project cost of option 1 of $30.3 million versus option 2, $30.8 million. Now, knowing that construction is still a couple of years off, and construction at least a couple of years off, construction costs continue to escalate every year, and we're assuming 2 years of escalation here. It could be more, but roughly of $1.8 million that brings this project cost with inflation to $32.1 million for option 1 and $32.6 million for option 2. Now, these are preliminary estimates based upon ideas and concepts at this point, and not hardline construction documents. So we know that at times costs come in lower than what we estimate at this point in the game. They can also come in higher because there's a lot of things we may not know yet that will be presented to us during design. So we show a low cost estimate of minus 10% of that number before, and a high cost estimate where we add some contingencies and for the unknown of 15%. So we have a range then of option 1 of $28.9 million to $36.9 million. And for option 2, $29.4 million to $37.5 million. And of course, the sale of downtown site could offset some of those costs in option 2 as well. Now, to put this in perspective with other county projects, in 2000, you completed a courthouse project of $23.8 million. And if we were to escalate those costs to today's dollars at the planning stage, that would have been a $46.1 million project. And the same with the $10 million satellite jail constructed in 1995, converted to today's dollars at this point in the game, it would be $22.6 million of improvements there.
So just a quick summary then of the master plan to sort of start to close this part out. We think in summary that we achieved the long-term solutions and met the planning objectives that we had set out to begin with. We have 307 beds proposed, serving a population that's 75% felony, 28% Class X first-degree charge, 86% repeat arrestees. We have new special needs in female housing pods that resolve the deficiencies, the key deficiencies that were identified there. We are proposing major improvements in safety, security, and living conditions. We have an increased focus through this concept on programs, visiting, and health. We have major repairs and fixes that are needed first before we get to all of that, though, of $2.7 million, as Chuck said. And that's really for issues of age and obsolescence, lack of preventive maintenance, and also energy code changes that we're trying to deal with some of these updates. In terms of the options, the basic costs, roughly $7 million for law enforcement, $25 million for the jail part of it. The proposals we think saves $10 million in 20-year life cycle jail costs. It saves $2 million in 20-year life cycle utility costs with option 2, saves $1 million over current costs with option 1. And then timing-wise, option 1 would be complete in June 2020 based on the preliminary schedule, option 2 in August 2019. And then just to conclude on a comparison of the options, there really is, kind of Chuck outlined there, we found little project cost difference between options 1 and 2. Option 2 saves $1 million more in utility costs over 20 years than option 1. Option 2, at the end of the day, is simpler, just if for no other reason the fact we're not getting into the renting business and all that other stuff. And it's completed 10 months faster than option 1. Option 2 is more flexible and expandable, and that's not only in terms of space, but parking. Option 2, the law enforcement solution, we think is far more efficient and effective. The consolidated operations of option 2 are easier for the sheriff's administration to manage, and also law enforcement can provide quick emergency backup to the jail. So from our point of view, option 2 is the recommended long-term master plan solution for the county, even though we recognize that phasing may be required depending upon cash flow of the county. Okay. The next steps then, if you go from here, and of course this discounts any steps. This is steps from a planner's point of view, as opposed necessarily from a board procedural point of view. But, key thing we talked about a lot is to test and repair the exterior concrete wall panels at the satellite jail. And then from there, to enter into the detailed space programming phase for the selected option, and then schematic design, and from that, generate more detailed and precise cost estimates that I think will also allow us to tighten those high-low range estimates. They're very wide now because we're very much at the conceptual stage, and also allow us to get closer to the end game and update the inflation estimates. And then finally, you complete your drawings and specifications for bidding and construction purposes. Or, you create modified or phased options and then take the above steps that we just outlined. Okay. And with that, we are ready for your questions. I think you gave us an hour and we're pretty close.
All right. Thank you all for this presentation. And now I'm opening the floor to the county board members for their questions and comments for our consultants. And a reminder to everybody on the board and in the room, this is a one-time capture of being able to ask our consultants these questions. So make good use of the time. Mr. Alex, please.
Madam Chair, question for you. I've got a number of general comments which I'd like to make at some point to the other members of the board and the public, but I assume we'd like to confine this to questions to the consultant first. So I've got a couple of questions for the consultant, and then I'll shut up, but I would ask to be recognized before we go into public comment.
Thank you very much for asking that question. Yes, the direction, since we have this one time with the consultants, to direct your questions to them.
A question. One of the things that was brought up in the Kalmanoff report was recommending attempts to expand things like work release program and provide more emphasis on lower classifications of security. I know the sheriff has a active classification program in the jail where they've been identifying inmates that are lower risk, and currently my understanding is that most of those inmates are housed at the downtown jail under somewhat more relaxed conditions of supervision, but it's still essentially a maximum security facility. To what extent did you attempt to address providing lower security classification space, and to the extent that you did not, why did you not?
Okay. Yeah, well, let me address the work release part first. I have to admit, that recommendation in ILPP report was a little mystifying to me in the sense that work release principally is targeted at a low-security sentence population. And when you instituted the electronic home detention program, you pretty much took that population out of the action. That's why I think you have, you know, in the new classification system, you have such a high percentage of what's classified as
And
maximum
if I can
legal.
interrupt by we, you're referring to the operation of the jail, which would be the sheriff's department, but.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
We don't run the
Taking too much ownership of the study. Yeah, but so I think the problem with the work release recommendation, which if I remember, they were targeting the nursing home, and they were talking about as many as 70 inmates for that. Well, we have a roughly a 10% census population, which out of 221 people is 20. So most of the people who really would be work release eligible are already out on the electronic home detention program. So we kind of dismissed that as an issue to begin with. As far as,
My only concern
Yeah.
there, if you apologize for the interruption, is
Yeah,
that.
no problem.
Unfortunately, the vagaries of the legislature and the judiciary being what they are, we're never, I think, entirely confident that electronic home detention will always be an option, or will always be an option for the classes of inmates for whom it currently is. So I guess I would say I'm not entirely convinced. I think it's a great program. I mean, obviously, I'd much
Right.
rather have people out on an ankle bracelet than in the jail.
Right.
But there has been some concern expressed over the years that, you know, with the stroke of a pen, that option might be taken away from us at some point. So
Yeah.
we may need to accommodate that.
yeah, let me address the rest of your, parts of your question then. There is an area in the satellite jail, one of the units within the B pod is actually designated for work release, and it has its own outside exit entry point. So to the extent, right now, they operate, if they wish to operate a work release program with the small numbers that would be involved, and really at this stage it'd be tiny numbers, that's the place where they would do it because they would utilize that entry-exit experience. With those small numbers, if you tried to create a separate facility, even though it would be a less costly facility, the killer would be the staff costs. Because you still need 24/7 coverage of whatever you have. So if you had, for example, a 10-person work release operation in today's terms, in terms of the inmate population, you'd probably be hiring 10 staff to run a 10-bed facility. And that would be the principal killer. Now, did we look at new forms of low security? No, we didn't. And the reason for that was that the real priority was to get that special housing area and to get the female and male mixed area. And when we did that, then, you know, we were left with trying to work with what was available in the space. Otherwise, if we started getting into new space for that, then, you know, we have really a preponderance. We're not talking about 164 new beds. We're talking 200 new beds, all targeted toward that minimum policy as well. So it just, at this stage of the game, it wound up not being a priority target.
I guess I, to some extent, understand what you're saying, but I'm
Yeah.
somewhat disappointed to see that in a facility that we're proposing for a long-term solution, we maybe haven't paid more attention to that, because I think there's been, I think the sheriff's efforts to identify inmates who are less of a security risk has been fruitful, and I would be disappointed to see the facility force us to go away from that.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Ms. Berkson, your microphone, please.
I've got a couple of questions. First, ILPP put a maximum urgency to contact family visits. For some reason, in the current jail 5 years ago, they just stopped it. And I guess nothing we can do about that, but we can see that there is real contact family visiting in the new one, and that professional square with the tables and chairs is not a family contact visiting area.
We have an area that's in there that's, well, if I had to estimate, is probably 2/3 of this main arena area, which would be potentially for a family visit
All
scenario.
right, but you listed it
And
as professional.
it'd be an open area with tables and chairs, and so it would be something that would facilitate a family visit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And excuse me, let me, there was also, we had 3 spaces that we also were creating for the smaller scale professional contact visits that they don't have now. So it could be used for one-on-one, two-on-one family visits. Now, as I mentioned before, attorney visits, a pastor coming to talk to somebody from community elements needing to interview somebody. So that was one of the things we were trying to add, was the contact form of visiting.
the difference is, they don't need to touch their pastor or their lawyer, But they do need to touch their kids. The kids can't bond with
Yeah.
somebody
No, no.
behind glass.
No, we weren't excluding that. I was saying we were looking at space to do both things, because they lack the other thing, too. They lack the one on the attorney-client visit, as an example. Right now, it's through a barrier. And so we wanted to also facilitate that as a direct contact.
Okay, my other question is, in option 1 and 2, in option 1, you've renovated the downtown, and, you know, it looks usable, it's become an asset. And in option 2, you don't mention what a large liability it is. I mean, you have either you're gonna have to destroy it, or you're gonna have to pay utilities and some maintenance on it. So that the costs are not really that equal when you consider that in one case, the downtown is an asset, and the other, it's a liability.
Yeah, what we were contrasting in cost terms were things that were only law enforcement and jail related. If the downtown facility were abandoned for law enforcement and jail functions, you know, there's several scenarios that could unfold. You know, one of which is the building is demolished and the property sold, in which case it's not on your books at all. You're not paying utilities or anything with that facility. Other option is, and I don't know what these things might be, there might be other things in the county that you want to use the building for. And that might take the place of something you would otherwise have to build, new. But I don't know what those functions are, because our portfolio was really to address the law enforcement and jail side of the equation.
Okay.
Astor, do you have any more questions?
No, how much would it cost to demolish it? Any idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had estimated it's probably very close to $1 million to demo that building. But we spoke to a couple of demolition contractors who felt there's also some salvage and value of the masonry, the steel, and some items in that building that could be recycled, so you might see some credit back for some of that. But it's, don't know the exact answer yet, but it's a large number to demolish it, yes.
Thank you.
All those we talked about, you know, one of the downsides of a jail, which makes it expensive, there's lots of steel and stuff like that in there. So there's also, to some degree, a reclaimed recyclable out of that as they demolish it. But I don't know, we don't know how much that would offset it, but we know there's lots of steel tables, steel doors, steel reinforcing in the walls. There's a lot of steel stairways, steel railings on the walkways. There's a lot of steel, as an example, that can be recycled.
Steel's cheap. Thank you.
Ms. Schwartz?
I have several questions. One of them was, according to your study of population, the highest, I understand your need for peaks, the highest I can see was 267. I don't know if it's 1 day or 2 days, it's hard to tell. Why are we designing a jail for 307? And I understand what you said about the county's population will grow, but I'm not sure that that's proportionately true for the jail.
Yeah.
We also know that the governor has initiatives to reduce, and so on. So I'm not really sure. It seems like we started with this number, and it doesn't matter what we studied about the population, we ended with the same number of beds as we have. I'm not really sure what we learned from the population study.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and probably needs clarification. Going back again to your previous study, ILPP's mission was to define projections and do that sort of stuff. The mission we were given was narrower. The premise of our mission, as given to us, was that you end up with essentially the same amount of beds you start with. Am I maybe not stating that artfully? Yeah. Yeah, the mission was to come up with solutions that were roughly the same amount of beds. Now, more specifically, when you look at numbers, to me, the way I look at things, the gap between 267 and 307 is not as great as that sounds, and it's for this reason. The 267 is a raw overall peak. The real challenge that these guys have to deal with is that you have other peaks within that. So as I showed, the male population goes from 141 to 240 something. So the overall peak number might be at 267, but when you're actually trying to allocate beds, have the right bed in the right place, it gets more complicated than that, because you may wind up in scenarios, and this is hard, it's called functional overcrowding in the jail world, and I think ILPP talked about it. It's when you have a person that you need to put in a bed, but you don't have the right bed in the right place. And the more in a classification system that we subdivide the population from high to low securities, the sick, the healthy, and so forth, and when you calculate peaks for those individual small groups, the fluctuations are wider. And when you add that up, it winds up with a number higher than an ultimate peak might be. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well.
No, I
but
understand the
there
point,
are
so it might have
classification
been-
challenges that complicate the peak number.
So how do you know 307 is the right number? Maybe it should be 500. I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but.
Right.
I mean, I'm not sure, you said two different things. You said you were given I'm not sure we told you, but I might not remember. So either you're trying to plan for the exactly current number of beds,
Right.
or you're trying to optimize for the classification. So which one is it?
Well, we're hopefully optimizing in the housing plans. We have the specific housing pods recommended, but basically the mission that we were given was to, in essence, come out about the same place we started. It wasn't to project the population. It wasn't to build 500. It wasn't to build 100. It would be to come out roughly where we started.
Okay, if I may, Phil, I have two more
Please,
questions.
go ahead.
I would like to echo Mr. Alex, I suppose, disappointment that we don't have any solutions from low security. And my point is, right now, obviously, using the downtown jail to reward, whether it's good behavior or low, I'm not sure what the right terminology is, but it sounds to me that the design we're talking about now eliminates that ability to reward. So why are we doing that?
Yeah. Well, it eliminates the downtown building, but it doesn't eliminate the freedom to do exactly the same thing in either Pod A or Pod B. Because in essence, the change that was made downtown was operational, it wasn't architectural. So for example, what they're doing is they're leaving doors open so that people can move. You can do the exact same thing at the satellite facility.
And my last question is, you did mention life cycle savings, and I appreciate that. I wonder if you happen to have any idea of, obviously, that jail will have to be bonded out, so there is a life cycle interest. So whatever the number is, 32, 37, 45, whatever, that's really not the number. And I know that you didn't bond it out, neither did we, but do you have any general thoughts of life cycle, with interest, how much it would really cost?
To build it, finance it, no. We weren't asked to address the financing question. We don't know how you'll finance it or in what manner, so
You can guess.
I guess you'll probably sell bonds.
Yeah,
But yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I'm not a
mean,
bond
I'm
guy,
just
so I don't
saying
know
we
what
should-
current rates are and what you can assume about that.
No, I understand it. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, when we talk about $10 million life cycle savings, we also need to remember it would be more than offset by the life cycle interest, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Shore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a number of questions. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Mr. Quisenberry struck a chord rather, when he described this as the Lexus of jails, but I have to disagree with him. I think this is the DeLorean of jails, which is to say that it would be thoroughly sleek and modern 30 years ago, but we now know it's a high-priced product that doesn't meet the total needs of those inside. To get this discussion back to the future of the needs of Champaign County, I am curious how the planning team, accounted for planned modernizations in our overall criminal justice system when crafting this proposal, such as the Community Resource Center, the Brianchi program, and support for those experiencing mental health or substance abuse issues that preempt the need for incarceration. Should the county board not be addressing both prongs of this challenge, both our jail and county programs simultaneously, so that you and we can better estimate our needs when we ask voters for their support of this project?
Well, in terms of your question, should we have looked at that? That wasn't part of our charge. So no, we didn't look at it. And then the other thing I would say to you is that's why you had that study 2 years ago. That's what its job was. So we had our job, they had their job. So no, we would have done it if asked, but we weren't asked.
All right, thank you. Can you give us an idea of what the expected lifetime of this facility is? Do we have any projection on that?
In what sense? You mean like wear and tear?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. How would you guys assess that? And again, and I should say, maybe they, however they answer that, they probably need to qualify it by the fact that you really need to do preventive maintenance and have budget items for that. And again, not to be hypercritical or anything like that, but that's part of the reason we're looking at 2.7 million of fixes, is that that hasn't been done in the past. So, yeah.
I mean, it certainly would be built with materials that, you know, properly maintained, would be 50-year at least life.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, do you know what the expected annual upkeep costs of that might be?
Annual maintenance? Annual preventive maintenance, I guess.
No, I don't.
No.
No, I do not.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions real quick. Actually, think I can narrow it down quickly. There was part of your presentation on slide 19, and I tied it back to slide 9, but we'll just stay with 19. You talked about taking away the lockers and the staff space in the current satellite jail and moving those into the new law enforcement center so you could repurpose the existing
Correct.
locker room. So jail staff will report to the law enforcement center, dress out, and then enter inside security. Does that include the break room area?
Yes, that would be the intent.
So they'll have to go outside security to go in a...
It's outside security right now. The facility is
fine.
zoned, yeah, the facility is zoned. The corner that is in is technically outside of the built security perimeter within the jail.
Right.
And they have to pass through a interlocked security system to get in.
When I looked at the numbers here, the current downtown law enforcement space for staff is about 1,713. And the projected for the jail staff, which is on a separate slide, talks about 1,285, totaling about 3,000 square feet. Basically, you're going to end up with 800 less square feet. And
Well,
is that through,
unless we made a math error there, we should not. We should wind up with more overall because
it's probably more likely I made the math error. But
it's possible we might have done it.
I think you follow my numbers, 1713 now at the downtown for law enforcement. Projected for the jail staff was a number of 1,285
Oh, yeah.
on another page. Oh, here,
Yeah,
slide
probably-
17.
Yeah, probably the,
Anyway, those together are about
yeah.
300 or 3,000 square feet. You subtract out what you're projecting for the
Yeah.
new option 2, now that you've lost 800 square feet.
Yeah, I think probably the difference is in just how the numbers were presented. You know, when we did that slide 17 on the jail stuff, for those who are following the subject matter here, we had to give a number just for jail staff on page 17 or slide 17 for the option where it would only be jail staff by themselves, you know, without the law enforcement center. The other one was a combined number. So hopefully we're out ahead of the game. But we'll have to check our math. I don't think we got it wrong, but we might have.
And I think I asked this question because I've yet to see a drawing of what the new law enforcement center looks like.
Yeah, right now it's just a block of space.
Yeah, it's just a block,
Yeah.
so I can't see the functionality
Right,
in there.
right, right.
Which I have a lot of interest in just from some past experience. So I'm clear, your need is in evidence storage or property management evidence and from the existing law enforcement facility downtown to moving to the new one.
Yeah,
Well, you
and-
need more, along with a records filing or records management, if you will.
Yeah, and if I had to characterize the problem in those two areas, it's actually less an issue of more space than it is to getting it all together in one place. Because right now, as I mentioned before, there's about 8 different locations where the evidence is stored out, including in the fan room above one of the cell blocks in the downtown jail. So, you know, issue number 1 is to consolidate it. Issue number 2 is to get it more space. And the same is true of the records area. again, that's all over the place, including infamously, down in the jail perimeter within the master control area.
Yeah, because the numbers show evidence property management's going to expand 108% from what it is now. When you add evidence property storage rooms and evidence property management, slide 19.
Yeah.
And
And I think,
maybe it's needed.
yeah, I think probably they're
I
part of the
remember taking the tour and thinking it was
Yeah.
pretty disorganized and you were storing
Well,
it everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that may be a math mistake in our part in the sense that the 482 describes the original base space, not all these little cubby holes all throughout the building, including
That's
the
what I
fan room.
thought.
Yeah, parts of the fan, not the fan room itself, the whole thing, but corners of it as an example.
All right. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. McGuire.
I guess I'd like to go back and address some of the issues and discussions that's come up and why the jail is the size it is, what impact reentry might have. I guess Governor Rauner's discussion about reentry and other programs. Of course, Governor Rauner's discussion and what programs and what part of 25% of the prison population might come back to this county or might not come back to this county, might end up back in our jails. We don't know, and we won't see for maybe 6 months to a year. So we don't know how many of those people will be in our jails or not in our jails. As far as the Adult Resource Center, which we'd like to see happen or not happen, we don't know what that might bring either. And I'm working hard to see a good program for the reentry program. And I think the sheriff and the police that in this community, in our communities, want to see that happen. And there's a good group in the Reentry Council working to have an impact, as we all are. But we don't know how that's going to impact it. But what I think the architects have been asked to do, and why this jail is the size it is to address some of the needs of the jail and the county. A few of the things I see is the classifications, the mental health issues that we have, separating women inmates from the rest of the populations, and moving into more single occupancy jail cells, up to as much as 35%. You can't do that in a smaller building. You have to have a larger building. The other things, which are things that people have asked for on page, or on the same page in 16, are programs for counseling and indoor exercise. Community mental health, that's community elements coming in and discussing these issues with the inmates. Reentry, electronic home detention, visitation, something that's been brought up, intake, holding, release, administrative staff support, medical and mental health care, and classification. All those are issues that take space in a new jail and new programming. When we're talking about the size of this jail and talking about whether it's DeLorean or Yugo or whatever, it takes a building and something that we're going to have to address. And it sounds like we have a plan here to move forward with if we're going to address these programs in jail.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Anybody else? Yes. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you. I just had a general procurement question about the cost projections. So when you guys are going through your procurement to find out the cost for materials that you're going to purchase, is there any kind of considerations for cost of American-made steel versus buying different types of steel?
Well, our estimates wouldn't be that defined yet.
Okay.
What we've used are national averages. I think generally those would be American-made products, local labor rates, things like that. But we don't even know how much steel would be in this yet to be able to estimate that.
So the local labor rates, is it based off of prevailing wage or?
Yes, prevailing wage.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Mhm.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, Mr. Harkey.
When we talk about record storage and evidence storage, Are there requirements beyond climate control to keep it in proper condition? Are there security requirements because it's evidence used in a court? Things like that? Is that why we have to have the evidence storage within the sheriff's office itself?
Yes, certainly as far as the evidence storage, there's always the issue of chain of custody, and you want to be able to demonstrate in court that you've protected the evidence and it hasn't been tampered with, and it can therefore be used as evidence. So probably, when you consider, you always think of security when you design a jail, but probably the most secure aspect of a law enforcement center is the evidence storage area so that you can demonstrate to the court satisfactorily that you've protected it.
And what percentage of the space that we need for this storage is within this category of absolutely must be kept secure and chain of custody managed?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what the number would be. We were talking about, 3,000 out of 20? Was that the number? So 15% range, 10 to 15%?
Thank you, Mr. Harkey. Any other questions? Mr. Maxwell, as Chair of the Facility Committee, do you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make at this time?
Not at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, all right. Ms. Bergson.
Can we get a cost breakdown where we can, use it as more of a laundry list than this? This is whole hog, and we don't know what we can afford and what we can't, because we don't have the numbers along the way.
Yeah, the answer is yes. You can get more detailed breakdown than this. We just didn't want to go through all that here, because some of the estimates were very detailed. We could have filled 15 slides, of it, but
Thank you.
There are more detailed numbers.
Thank you, Ms. Bergson. Mr. Rosales, as Vice Chair of Facilities, do you have any comments or questions you'd like to make at this time?
Sure. I didn't have anything in particular, but to follow up on Hannah's question, when we are discussing labor, are you going to be using contractors that are within the county, or are you going to be using contractors perhaps from Indiana and out of the county? There's a lot of construction in Champaign County, but I think a lot of those contractors are not from here. So I wanted to know how much money of the $32 million perhaps would stay in this county.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're nowhere close to that part. And you usually, when you get into that issue, that's usually in the written specifications. When you're well down the road, you have a building designed, you're preparing specifications and things like that. There will always be some parts when you get to a jail that will come from somewhere else, particularly because when you get to the security locks and equipment, they're manufactured by people all over the country, although we do have one in Illinois that does it. And two of them actually that do it in Illinois. And we've done that before, but you have to potentially bear some additional costs by limiting competition. But you can specify just 2 lock types, as an example, to make sure it's an Illinois manufacturer. It's easier to do with the general things, and Jim may even be able to comment on it. I know we've had facilities where we've even got to the point where we've talked about designing mechanical systems that not only are provided by local people, but can be repaired by local people. Because you can get systems that, based on their complexity, they're not made around here, and then they present a problem to you later in trying to fix those things. So, but that stuff's way down the road. When we looked at that schedule, if you looked at our schedule, that's probably a year down the road in decision making.
And if we look at jails as an economic impact, especially in our community, what would be the job creation ratio if this project were to go through? I want to be able to go back to my community and say, well, there'll be 100 jobs created for the next 5 years. Wow. And, perhaps, many of our union people could participate and profit also or benefit from the use of creating a jail here in our county.
Yeah, well, I don't know what the numbers, these guys might know better than I would, but there would almost certainly be that for sure. Although I'll tell you, if you remember what we were talking about your jail staff, we're not really trying to create jobs there. We're trying to save you jobs, or leave that in a position where it's not breaking the bank. But yeah, certainly during that construction period, there are a lot of things that can be built by local people.
And the last question I have, if you all permit, Can you give me a little cliche so that I could at least tell my constituents that we're not spending $800,000 per bed for 40 beds, or if you were to reconfigure the numbers, $104,000, $104,000 per the reconfigurement of 307 beds.
Yeah, I think.
Because that's when you look at the numbers, that's how much we're really investing to reconfigure how these 307 beds are going to be observed or how would I say it, serviced. So right now, it is very inappropriate. We can't basically house, special populations. We can house mental patients or mental inmates or women or medical or gang-related, individuals within the cell block. So we're spending about $104,000 per bed to be able to accommodate that. Could you give me a little cliche to sell to my constituents that this is the right thing to do, that we're spending and getting our bang for our money?
I think that we are proposing a safer, more secure, more standards-compliant facility that is far more responsive to the needs of the people in the facility. That's the essence of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosales. Rachel, did you have another question? I couldn't.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I have a question for you. I know that you've designed, as far as you're concerned, the best possible design, but we all know we can't afford it. So, and we know whether we call it Alexis or whatever, irrelevant the name. I think you read in the papers, just like I did, that it will have to go to a referendum. We all can guess what the probability of this passing and so on. So before we get to that, is there any way you can think of a plan B, or as far as you're concerned, it's to take it or leave it, and this is it? I'm talking about the jail. I understand you have two options, but is there any way you can rethink it or redesign it? I'm not talking about shopping and doing cell 1 versus cell 2 in 2 years, but is it even an option, or are you saying this is it?
Yeah. Well, I've been involved in planning facilities for, I hate to say this now, don't write this down, 42 years. And there's always two ways to approach the project. The first way is that you do what we did. Your job is to identify problems, identify responses, and then put a price on it. And it's then for the elected body to tell you whether that works or not. If it doesn't work financially, you can certainly go within it, because there are, it's not just one recommendation. There are multiple recommendations to do different things, multiple renovation recommendations, create an indoor and an outdoor. There's a lot of things that you can then break apart. The other way that studies are done, and it's almost never done this way, I almost always ask this question, and I always get the answer no, is you tell me how much money you have to spend, and then we'll come up with something. Now, I will say that the common fear that people have when I say that is, oh, well, you're just going to tell it, we're going to spend every penny we have, so I'm not telling you. So we almost never spend that. So, but I don't know if there's probably any project that we've been involved with where there ultimately isn't a clash of at some level between what is needed and what a budget can accommodate, which is why, kind of the final note we made on the summary was many plans are phased. You don't do it all at once, but you set the stage. But what this creates is a master plan that you can execute, even if you have to execute it in pieces as opposed to a whole. The next step really, because I don't know, and I don't know if these guys know the answer, we don't know what the answer is about what you can or cannot do financially. We don't know what that answer is. If some targets for that can be set, we can go about the business of saying, okay, are there things that aren't that important that we should delete? How would we break it up based on the available monies that you can do something with? So, but that's out of my pay grade. That goes back to the board to begin to give us parameters.
Well, I guess I understand you didn't want to put too many things on the slides, but my disappointment is that this report, that wasn't limited in pages, didn't have anything other than this as far as costs. You didn't give us options. You didn't tell us. There was really no breakdown whatsoever. So back to the other questions. And some things are not possible. So it's not just the list of here's how many locks, here's how much it's going to cost, because that's not going to do anything for me. Some things are dependent. You can't do this. I can't just cross line number 17 because I don't like that number. So I need something a little bit more informative that says, these are the things that have to happen or not happen. This is optional. And right now, you gave us a really long report, but didn't have any details whatsoever for me to make any informed decision other than this, which is really pretty much one number. So can you give us
Well-
that information?
Well, we have more detailed breakdowns we can give you on costs. We can give you those lines 17, 18, 19 through 200 on costs.
Yeah, but that's
with
not
different pieces.
useful because I wouldn't know which
But-
line I can
Yeah, but-
eliminate without the
Yeah,
rest.
but when you make the comment that we didn't give you options within the options, the question is, what are those options with the options predicated upon? Is it predicated on I can only spend $10? Is it predicated I could spend $20 million? Is it predicated? See, that's what I meant about parameters. There's a point at which, you know, I think we answered the core question. We provided a master plan based on the parameters of the study. Now we need the feedback to figure out how you bring it to fruition and what you bring to fruition. But that's why I say the ball kind of gets kicked back in your court on that side. I mean, I don't know what these parameters are, what the limits are, so if you ask me the question, what's the option within the option, I don't know what to base it upon.
Do you have more questions? Mr. Maxwell?
It isn't a question, Patsy. May I kind of follow up a little bit on what was just said?
Absolutely, Mr. Maxwell.
It seems to me this is the work that we're going to be going about within the committee the next several months, we've got the report, and we're going to have to figure out if we have any money or where we're going to proceed. And we will be looking at how much money is available, what we think might be available, timelines that we can put some of these ideas together. And it seems to me this is, the committee needs to be working on these items the next several months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Yes, Mr. Harper.
I just think that the committee has addressed what we asked them to do. I appreciate that. The money issues, that's going to be a long, drawn-out discussion where we go, but the sheriff's office, the state's attorney, they have housing problems, and we're trying to meet those problems. We've started programs for reentry and this and that, but there's still going to be a need for jail, and I think what they have given us are solutions that meet state and federal mandates on how inmates are celled up. I mean, do I want to spend $32 million? Show me where the money is, and then we go down the road. But I believe the sheriff and everybody asked these gentlemen to address the problems they had. Now we got to hammer it out in the next year or so.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Yes, Mr. Rosales.
Were the exterior walls of the existing pod ever addressed?
Of the satellite jail?
Right, the current
Yeah, we
existing
put,
pod.
in the estimate right now, we have dollars assigned to those improvements that were suggested in the West Janney Elstner report. Now, you're doing further study of those panels now so that you have maybe a better understanding of the cause of those problems, and that might affect the numbers when we see that final report. But we do have dollars in there as a bit of a placeholder at this point based on that West Janney Elstner recommendation.
And we would not be using the same type panel formation to create the new pod? Or is the panels are okay, but it's the foundation that is weak?
Well,
and that's what's cracking those panels, or?
I think that's what we're going to find out with that study you're doing, what's the cause of that problem. But precast panels have been used for many, many years. It's a good product. You're getting some failure over there, and the engineers are trying to find out why. But it's a cost-effective solution, and probably one that's worth considering if we can avoid whatever the problem is causing the cracks now.
But the new pod would not be of the same type of construction material.
Cracking one.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there were some details there that we would I know we would not recommend burying the foundation detail like it is, because I've heard of other problems similar to that. But the precast panel itself, if it were sitting on a foundation wall that comes above grade, we have a lot of confidence in a solution like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Harkey.
To kind of keep fishing at what Rachel was kind of getting at, and this is where my concerns lie. If we move forward as a committee and start looking at this in depth, are we going to be able to say, look, you know, guessing from our finances and what we really want to do as a county, we only want to build the yellow section and the purple section, for example? Can you give us then cost estimates or guesses as to whether that's feasible and whether that would, you know, be something we could split up and handle some of our other problems, just a slightly smaller solution?
Oh, absolutely, we can give those numbers.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Any further questions, Mr. Herkey? No, all right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Harper.
If we do like Josh says, where you phase it in, how does that address total bed needs, though?
Well, yeah, you'd lose immediately whatever beds there are. Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Mr. J.
My real concern is we do not have a very good track record of taking care of our buildings, as everybody here knows now. And my real concern is I don't want us cutting corners with equipment going in this building because we don't have enough money. So can I have an assurance from you folks that you will not do that and give us the quality that we need, that'll last us for a few years?
Speak up, Chuck.
Well, I mean, certainly, there's always a balance between quality and future maintenance costs. And I think that's a discussion we usually have with our client about what the expectations are of that, and you've stated that now. Generally, that comes with higher initial costs as well, but no building is absolutely maintenance-free. You know, even the satellite jail, those joints between the panels need to be maintained. Sealant needs to be replaced every number of years so that you can avoid some issues like possibly that you might be seeing now there. So nothing's completely maintenance-free, but certain levels of construction buy you more time than others, certainly.
Yes, go ahead.
Just quickly, not to belabor this, but we've had some equipment failures in some relatively new buildings. In fact, our very newest building that we built, that looked like to me as a farmer that it didn't last very long. It should have lasted longer than that, even if it didn't have the proper maintenance. And I'm just not sure that we're getting the quality of inputs because that building ran over a little more than what we thought it was going to be, with some other problems that we need not get into tonight.
Thank you, Mr. J. Yes, Mr. Rosales.
Minor hidden costs. When looking at the repairs of the existing pod, would the doors and locks be redone since we were looking at the possible reconfiguration of the locks? Would that be in addition to, or would it be included in this overall cost?
One of the what we call the 3-year maintenance cost at the satellite is the complete replacement of the intercom and lock control system. And my recollection is it's about $640,000 to do that. Okay. So there's a big chunk of money going towards exactly what you're speaking of.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Ms. Coward.
Since our county's got a poor record of maintaining their buildings, is it possible that you could, like, give a list of stuff, say, this, that, and other need to be looked at and maintained within a certain amount of time to make sure that everything is okay, no cracks or whatever?
Yes, and we've done that for clients in the past, given them some, idea of when they can expect some major repair costs or maintenance costs on certain things? Yes.
I was wanting you to write it down in your report. Say the outside structure should be looked at within 3 years to make sure that everything is okay, because the building that the satellite jail, it was in need of repair within, I'd say, about 7 years after it was built. And we don't want the same thing to happen to, if we get a new building there, we start having structural damage within 5 years of you all building.
Mr. Maxwell.
I think it's kind of common practice, especially with the Capital Development Board, for instance, that a operations manual is actually provided to close the project.
Okay.
Like with a brand-new car, I don't know about you guys, but I got my maintenance manual. I've never cracked that open. I think that may be the problem.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I have the last question, and then Mr. Alex has asked to reserve some time for his cleanup comments of this session of the board. For just a few minutes, would you talk about, it's slide 28 for those who are looking at things, talk about this next stage that you have on your timeline of programming and schematics. Nobody has asked a question about this, and you have this listed as our next stage. I'm not asking the question to direct the chair of facilities. I'm asking the question just out of curiosity, what you have in mind for that stage.
The programming stage, excuse me, is a more detailed examination of the space needs that literally results in a room-by-room set of space lists. At this stage, for the purposes of needs assessment and option development, we excuse me, we limit the amount of examination that we do, and certainly we're not at the room-by-room basis. But basically, programming results in full detailed space lists of every room that you expect in a building, clustered by component with relationships described, more extensive narratives about what's going into that, another second reassessment of staffing based on the new detailed programming. And it's basically I always refer to it as the instruction book to the designer of what exactly it is that should be designed and how the spaces should be organized. And then schematic design is the first stage of design. A lot of people refer to it as preliminary design, where the fundamental purpose of it is to actually establish the floor plan, the vertical relationships to the extent you have them, initial assessment of the mechanical, electrical, structural systems that you're going to employ, so that in fact you know now exactly what it will look like and you have a much better idea of what it will cost.
Thank you. I think that helps all of us figure out and move to this next section on your timeline here. Mr. Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify, I don't expect to have the last word. I just didn't want to break up the flow of the question and answer. Just got a couple of things to talk about. One is the relationship between programming and facilities, and the other is money, which means basically all I'm going to talk about is money, because that's what drives the relationship between programs and facilities. I don't think anybody in this room is going to disagree that incarceration is expensive. Whether you spend 10, 20, 30, or $50 million on a jail, the jail still isn't the most significant part of operating the jail. It's the staff in the jail, it's the support systems that go around it. So I hope there is no doubt in this room that efforts to reduce jail population are clearly worthwhile. And whether you believe that is a matter of social justice or whether you believe that is a matter of economics, I think all the indications point in that direction. And I think that's guided the discussions that we've had here over the last several years. County Board and the Mental Health Board currently invest about $500,000 a year in what I would legitimately call non-incarceration programs, delinquency prevention, this new reentry program, which is, kind of in its early stages, inmate classification program, in-jail mental health services, and so on. Can we do more? Yes, but the question that I think is most relevant to the facilities issue is whether, with additional programming, we can program our way out of needing to address this long list of facilities deficiencies that we've been presented with. And I would argue that the answer is essentially no. And I would argue that based on looking at what Champaign County's per capita incarceration rate actually is. Unfortunately, the state's data is a few years old, but if you go and look at what data there is available, Champaign County has essentially the lowest incarceration rate of what are generally our comparable counties. It seems that to find a county in Illinois that has a lower incarceration rate than Champaign County, we need to either look at counties that are very rural or counties that are very rich. Champaign County's rate, and again, this is not a scientific study, this is the best I can do with Google and some back-of-the-envelope calculations, but it certainly would appear that Champaign County has a lower incarceration rate than, for example, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, which has been notable for their pretrial release program. We appear to have a lower incarceration rate than Lee County, Florida, which has made the news with their initiatives to decarcerate the homeless population. We appear to have a lower incarceration rate than Bexar County, Texas, which has made the news for their mental health center and their decision to fully train all their law enforcement officers in CIT programs for helping to de-escalate confrontations with mentally ill. Now, why is this the case? Well, it's the case because in the last 15 years, there's been an active effort to reduce the jail population in Champaign County through things like electronic home detention, through things like a 365-day-a-year arraignment court, things like a speedy trial order by the chief judge, things like active review of cases by a prosecutor prior to arraignment. This is not, New York City night court where your name pops up in a folder and you sit in Rikers Island waiting for a real prosecutor to look at your case. Most importantly, the jail population has dropped because of a strong degree of cooperation between the judges, the state's attorney, public defender, the sheriff, and the courts administration to actively manage the jail population. Now, more recently, we are seeing increased efforts to CIT train officers in Champaign, Urbana, and U of I police departments. They're not where they need to be, but they're moving in a positive direction. The sheriff has been actively encouraging police departments to use notices to appear where possible in lieu of bringing people to the jail, and we're seeing some success with that, I believe. And there are efforts underway to find funding for an adult crisis center. It should be a voluntary alternative to jail admissions for intoxicated, mentally ill, or individuals in crisis. And there is no doubt that to some extent these will make a difference in the jail population. But are they a practical alternative to addressing facilities issues? Can we achieve, a 30 or a 40 or a 50% decrease in an already relatively low per capita jail population through programming? And I would argue that the answer is no. There's this narrative out there that a lot of the jail population is in jail because they're charged with trivial offenses, or that if we have a jail, we will fill every available space in the jail just as a matter of policy. And to the best I can tell, neither of those actually appears to be true. So let's talk about money, because this is all about trying to do the right thing and save money, right? There's a $35 million proposal on the table. I'm going to round to 35. It's, you can read the numbers any way you want. It's about a $12 million office building and about a $23 million jail, as far as I make the numbers out. If you look at the cost of that facility over its lifespan as a whole facility, so jail and sheriff's office, you're talking on the order of $1 million a year. We've identified on the order of $500,000 a year in potential savings from consolidating, not operating two jails, but operating one. So if the goal is to free up money to spend on programming, it would seem like we'd want to take the more efficient approach. Downtown jail's 35 years old. It's essentially getting worn out. Some of that is certainly the blame of the county board due to deferred maintenance. Some of that is because it's 35 years old, it's seen hard use, it's a jail, and its systems are aging. There are
Americans with Disability Act issues, which we will eventually have to address there or face the consequences. There are issues with meeting modern correctional standards at the downtown jail, which we will have to pay to address. There's been discussion about, is keeping the downtown jail off the table? Well, by definition, no. I mean, as long as it's there, it's on the table. It can be fixed, but it's not going to be cheap. So, several years ago, I think I made a statement to the effect that Champaign County doesn't have $20 million to spend on a jail. It was true then, and it's true now. I think the elephant in the room here is a $35 million project, or even a $25 million project, is so far in the excess of the county's ability to fund based on current revenues that, to some extent, this discussion at this point is academic. With regard to the public safety sales tax, we've got some current bond issues which will be fully paid off and expiring. We will see about $1 million annual amount of the public safety sales tax freed up in 2018. We'll see another $1 million a year of the public safety sales tax freed up in 2023. Together, those still aren't enough to be able to bond a project of this scope. So where's that money going to go? Well, I know where some of it's going to go. There's been discussion lately about this proposal in Springfield to achieve a 25% reduction in prison population in the state prisons. Well, one school of thought might be that the state would accomplish that by doing something crazy like backing off on the drug war or restoring judges' discretions by eliminating ridiculous minimum sentences. However, I have lived in Illinois long enough to subscribe to the other school of thought, which is that the way that the state's going to reduce its prison population is the way they've done it in the past, which is pushing those people down to the county jails, waiting longer to take people who are sentenced, and that could have a significant impact on our jail population. We're also looking, as everybody who heard the budget address knows, at potential significant cuts in state funding in general, which is going to put further pressure on our ability to meet the county's statutory obligations, among the most important of which is law enforcement. So where's that money going to go? Well, I have a bad feeling I know where some of it's going to go. But the bottom line is, wherever that money goes, the only way that a project of this scope is going to happen is if this board and the voters in Champaign County approve a referendum for a tax increase. And I think the county board really only has two options here. One is we go out for additional revenue, for example, a 1/4-cent sales tax for facilities. That would help address projects like this, provide funding for ongoing maintenance of all county facilities. And then we look to the public safety sales tax to address programming and other needs of the justice system. Or we either don't go out for additional revenue, or we go out for additional revenue and fail. And in that case, we're looking probably at dedicating all the available public safety sales tax money that's freed up to keeping the current system running. And that includes the $500,000 a year in inefficiency of having 2 jails. It includes a growing list of problems with these aging buildings. And I absolutely do not intend that to sound like an ultimatum. It is not, you better pass this or else. But I think the reality is that enough of our ongoing revenue from the public safety sales tax is going to be consumed just with ongoing fixes to these buildings, that there's not going to be enough there to bond really anything as far as a bonded construction project. So I guess to sum up, because I've taken way too much time already, I am absolutely supportive of doing what we are doing and what we can do in the future to help keep people out of jail. I don't think there should be anybody in jail who doesn't need to be there. But I also don't think that we're going to program our way out of this long list of facilities deficiencies that we have. This problem's not going to go away. I think the proposal that we've been brought here tonight, although I think everybody has reacted to it with some degree of sticker shock, I think it's exactly what we asked for. I think it's a comprehensive attempt to do it right in terms of addressing these facility needs, housing for individuals with mental issues, housing for individuals with medical issues, dealing with the single selling problem, providing program space, providing adequate space for law enforcement, the law enforcement side. If I were making the decision by myself,
I would look to see ways in which we might be able to reduce the cost of this project to some extent, but realistically, I know there's not going to be a whole lot to cut. And I would say we should do it, because I think if you look from a total cost of ownership standpoint, for making the long-term financially responsible approach, it's consolidating the jails, it's investing in a facility that's going to meet our needs going forward. But the bottom line is, it's not my decision, and I don't think the board has the ability to commit to this project until we determine where we're going to get the money. And with that, I'll shut up.
Okay, now that you've heard Mr. Alex, do any of the members of the board want to concur or comment on his long tale of what is going on with us at the board? Yes, Mr. Shore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say that I thoroughly agree with Mr. Alex's assessment, which is that we do face serious financial challenges, and we do need to address our facilities challenges, both for the good of the people in the jail as well as the people who staff the jail. That being said, I think that the referendum in some will be an easier pill for some people to swallow if we do find a way to come up with a comprehensive plan on our criminal justice system, as opposed to a plan that is just a facilities issue. For example, I don't think most of these people here are going to support a tax increase that just goes towards the jail, but if we include a lot of money for the programs that would reduce our already, as Mr. Alex said, phenomenally low incarceration rate, that would go a long way.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Yes, Mr. Kibler.
I was actually being very quiet, and so I apologize for now wanting to speak. Mr. Shore came up with a very, very good closing statement. And it comes to something that I hit almost everybody on, and this is for almost everybody in this room, including county board members, including members of the public, because you'll get a chance to speak. Define success. Where do we need to be successful in reducing recidivism, reducing the number of people in the jail? Right now, we're at 1.1 people per 1,000 in our jail. Where do we need to be successful? What do we need to have off the table? And it may not be a number. It may simply be change the laws so that the only people in jail have done X, Y, and Z, or are named Sam, or whatever we need to do to say that those people belong in jail. But in the end, we have to define success, because otherwise we're going to continually chase our tail. So if you have those ideas and you have those thoughts about what success truly is, I would love to hear it if we're going to talk about adding services and programs to a facility-oriented project.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Maxwell.
We've talked mainly about jail, 100% about jail this evening. Facilities is a bigger issue than just jail. Jail's a large part of it, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we have considerable facilities problems, and I include information technology in that, what our needs will be over the next 10 to 20 years. So let's try to address this, and I agree with much what Chris had to say, but let's don't lose sight of the fact that we have a facilities problem, of which the jail is a large part of. Thank you.
Any other comments from board members? All right, we are going to have a 10-minute recess, but before we leave, I do want to point out that are having public participation where the public can ask questions and have dialogue with the consultants is a response by the chair and vice chair of facilities and from a request from the public if this could be arranged during this study session. So we have set this up, which is slightly different than our normal public participation rules. It's for 60 minutes. People can make a statement, or they can ask a question and a follow-up question to the consultants. We will try to keep the clock going so that people do stay within our present rule of 5 minutes. I will go and look at the numbers that have been taken to see if the 5 minutes need to be slightly adjusted, because in that 60 minutes, that would allow 12 people to have an exchange with the consultants. And we are encouraging everybody, as I said at the top of our meeting, that this is a rare opportunity to have an exchange with the consultants and take advantage of it and direct your questions to them. You can talk to us as board members anytime you come before us during public participation. So it is now 8 o'clock. I'll call the meeting back to order at 8:10. All right, everybody, the clock says, actually, my phone says 8:12, so let's get back in order. Thank you very much. Do we have enough? Let's count them. We have enough? Okay.
Can I return? We got somebody had to leave, so we have one vacancy.
Oh, we'll auction it off. There you go. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. And we're back in session, and will the clerk please call the roll?
Cowart. Esri.
Here.
Harper. Here. Harrison.
Here.
Hartke. Jay. Here. Kibler.
Here.
Maxwell. Here. McGuire. Here. Michaels. Here. Mitchell. Here. Quisenberry. Rosales. Schrader. Schwartz. Shore. Weibel. Alex. Anderson. Bergson. Carter. And Petrie.
Here. A quorum is present. Just to review the plans for public participation for maybe people who arrived a little bit after I talked about it before the recess. We have an hour set for public participation. This is slightly a different format than we normally have during county board meetings, and it's in response to requests from many of you who are sitting here in the audience that you wanted this opportunity to be able to ask questions of our consultants. So we have arranged to do that. We set up a system of numbers. I know the lady who got number 1 because she was here so bright and early at 5:30. And we will start with number 1 and just go through the numbers. And we're setting it at our usual time of a maximum of 5 minutes for the participant. Then the consultants can take the amount of time they need to answer any inquiry. I do encourage that if you hear your question that you have in mind asked by somebody before you, to pass along your number so that enough people will have a chance to participate. We have 18 numbers out, and if we do it at 5 minutes for each person, then that's only 12 people. But if people use a shorter period of time, we hope to be able to accommodate everybody who has a number. Since we do not have slips out for you all to fill out tonight, when you come up to speak, for the courtesy of the clerk, not only say your name, but would you also spell your name so she gets it accurately into the record. Okay, and I have one last piece of instruction. The gentleman sitting right next to the speaker's table is John Jay, and if you would just hand your number to Mr. Jay when you come up to speak. So we're starting with number 1.
There's already been a change in number 1. No, but we know each other. My name is Diane Zell, D-I-A-N-E, Z as in zebra, E-L-L. I am the immediate past president of NAMI, Champaign County. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I am a member of the NAMI Illinois Board of Directors. But I'm here tonight because I'm representing the 1 in 4 families in Champaign County who are seriously affected by mental illness. As I was, excuse me for my glasses here. As was stated in a recent Leonard Pitts syndicated opinion column in the News Gazette, mental illness is not a fad. It is not going away. Citizens living with it must be treated as individuals and not criminals. NAMI therefore stands with the Urbana City Council in urging the members of this county board to work with other entities in Champaign County to reduce incarceration and provide for alternatives to incarceration, as Mr. Alex and Mr. Shore, both eloquently stated. We do appreciate your support and your comments. Alternatives to incarceration for individuals living with mental illness and or substance abuse issues. Champaign County citizens who are living with mental illness with whom I have spoken have told me that being held in a facility run by correction officers is a jail. Whether we call it a jail or not, whether we call it a special needs pod, it's still jail, and such housing would be detrimental to their health. So what would be helpful for those coping with mental illness, their loved ones, and the taxpayers of Champaign County? Well, of course, as was mentioned earlier, crisis intervention team training for all first responders in Champaign County is a basis. Housing first for all people who are homeless, because 70 to 80% of people who are homeless have a mental illness. Third, creation of a mental health diversion facility. We can call it community resource center, we could call it a lot of things, but it would be a one-stop shop rehabilitation facility for those living with mental illness and or substance abuse who find themselves caught up in the criminal justice system. A facility like this is currently being fast-tracked in Dade County, Florida, where they hope to eliminate homelessness by 2016. We also need an adequate maintenance budget for our existing county buildings in order to extend their useful life, as was already pointed out. Communities in Texas, Utah, and Florida, and other areas around the nation are saving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars every year by treating those living with mental illness rather than incarcerating them. We can and must spend taxpayers' money wisely here in Champaign County while providing better outcomes for citizens living with mental illness. Treatment works. Let's help our citizens living with mental illness get it in a timely fashion here in Champaign County. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Zell. Number 2.
My name is Lynn Branham, B-R-A-N-H-A-M. I'm a visiting scholar at St. Louis University Law School. My expertise is correctional and sentencing law and policy. And I think it also bears noting that I have served on the Commission on Accreditation for Corrections for almost 16 years. Having participated in over 700 commission hearings involving conditions at jails, prisons, and other correctional facilities across the country, I am in a position to commend this facilities planning team for your very thorough assessment of the physical plant deficiencies, some very grave deficiency at the 2 jail sites. I have 3 recommendations bearing on this draft facility plan that I'd like to mention now. The first and most fundamental, any final master facility plan must be conjoined with and be part of a master system plan, one that reflects evidence-based practices. That master system plan can and must significantly limit pretrial detention, in part by moving, as research says, can be done and is being done elsewhere, from cash-based to risk-based system of pretrial release. The master plan also must provide for the continuum of community sanctions, including a day reporting center that the Community Justice Task Force, ILPP, and the National Institute of Corrections all concurred is needed in this county. Jurisdictions across this country are formulating such systemic plans, and they are doing so through criminal justice coordinating councils, like those the Community Justice Task Force recommended be formulated in this county. Without a system plan, any facility plan should be summarily rejected by the taxpayers. It should be DOA, dead on arrival. Recommendation number 2, a facility plan should not include, as proposed, a special pod for the many individuals who are confined 72 hours or less. 69% of confined individuals are released within 72 hours or less. That's our data from ILPP. As part of its systemic plan, the Coordinating Council can ensure that steps are taken to keep that population from even being booked into the jail. And they can do so through, for example, a pre-booking risk assessment process. And the systemic plan can also put in place pretrial services, or the pretrial services program, that will enable many others to be released pretrial. Recommendation number 3. The draft facility plan right now provides for unassigned space to allow for later integration of pretrial screening, and that's because of the constraints under which this facility planning team was operating. But we must make sure that the facility plan specifically is configured in a way that designates space for the pre-screening assessment, or I'm sorry, pre-booking assessment I just mentioned, and for the pretrial services program at the jail. I'd like to share some good news with you. The MacArthur Foundation in the past few weeks announced that it is going to award planning grants in the amount of $150,000 to 20 jurisdictions to develop a system plan to reduce jail incarceration. The planning will occur from May to December of this year. 10 jurisdictions will then receive an additional $500,000 to $2 million annually for 2 years and perhaps longer to facilitate the implementation of that system plan. I just think it's prudent for the county to at least try to secure that funding, because we've got to engage in that system planning in any event. I would like to offer and volunteer my services over the next month to facilitate the development of that grant proposal. It is due on March 31st. To secure that grant, we need the judges, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, law enforcement officials, service providers, the university, Parkland College, and others to support and assist in this endeavor. We need everybody to get on board. Now, I don't expect it to happen, but if there are any stakeholders who will not support this systemic planning, the public needs to be informed who those individuals or entities are. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Dorothy Vurawise, 2103 Mills Drive. My last name is Vura-Weis. Thank you all for staying here after the intermission, and for the good work that's gone into all that's we've heard about this evening. I'd like to step back and look at a couple of the other studies that were also done and lead up to a question to the consultants. Champaign Community Justice Task Force, formed by this board, presented its report and recommendations in June 2013, recommendations that were consistent with the reports by the National Institute of Corrections funded consultant in 2011 and by ILPP later in 2013. They focused on how to improve the public safety and community well-being, and they made 10 recommendations that over time will also save taxpayer money. 6 of them are as follows. 1, expand existing pretrial services into a comprehensive pretrial services program. 2, develop a system of care for behavioral health services, both substance abuse and mental health, and this includes not just an assessment center, but actually having enough treatment services available in the county for all the people who need them. Right now, there's a tremendous backup. 3, expanding community diversion and sentencing sanctions. As has been mentioned, this would include restorative justice to help people take responsibility for the consequences of their action, a day reporting center, continual electronic supervision, and these help people to maintain the relationship with their families and their communities, so there's less likelihood of recidivism. Also, it decreases costs. 4, establish an adequate reentry program to decrease recidivism, and also this is, again, a way to decrease costs. And an adequate program needs more funding than the current one has. Number 5, form a racial justice task force. The overrepresentation of African Americans in the jail population needs to be evaluated to determine and address the contributing factors, and also to address the differential impact of arrests, detention, and sentencing on this part of our community. And also to be sure that we not only know what's going on, what's causing it, but that we address the problem so that we move towards equity on it. And then 6, collect data so that we can really see what's happening, whether we're making progress. I don't think that comparing ourselves to other United States populations for incarceration rates is adequate, since we are approximately 3 times the next country in the world. And following these recommendations will improve the safety in Champaign County as a good place to live and to do business. The funding for them needs to be placed at the highest level of priority. The Community Justice Task Force also recommended increasing the proportion of the public safety sales tax to preventive measures up to 30%. And a number of other individuals are also going to be speaking to this. So that's one part of what I wanted to say, but also the NIC report recommended, in order to make it possible to move people out of the downtown jail into the satellite jail, that low-risk offenders could be placed in a dormitory-style setting, and that this could even be done with relocatable buildings, which could even be donated by community organizations, and they could get a tax credit on it, or tax deduction. They also said that program space could be provided this way. And so I wonder if you can comment on how this would interact with the plans you've suggested, and how it might reduce the number of buildings that would be needed, because you would have space to shuffle people around as we see how these social programs, how these preventive programs are going to have an impact on the total population in the jail.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, for me and our team, I suppose, when we look at planning, it's not only the issue of facilities, it's also the issue of staffing. And so there, I think, is an inherent reluctance on our part to start breaking a total population into multiple buildings with small populations, because as I had commented earlier, you have to staff those buildings, and you have to staff them 24/7. And it's almost like going back to what we're trying to get away from. We're trying to attain some staff efficiencies by consolidating a building rather than breaking it into multiple pieces.
Excuse me, if 34% of the people in jail are low risk, that sounds like that probably isn't just a small number of people.
Well, what would you propose to break them out into?
If 30% of, we're looking at 70 or 80 people.
But that's an eternal evaluation of how they behave within the facility, okay? But even if you took that out, one way to look at it is that we probably have about 25% of our population at the downtown jail. But as a consequence of running that downtown jail and running a separate satellite facility, we're highly staff efficient. We cost ourselves a lot of money because we're running 2 different facilities. You can have minimum level space within a single building. And again, I don't know if you had a chance to read the report, but one of the critiques we made that you'll know is that the housing, the style and the architecture of the housing in both buildings is almost uniformly hard and the same. Modern jails make a mix of construction materials, type, colors, light, feeling, and things like that. So you can have, housing for minimum custody people more appropriately designed in a building that is generally secure overall.
Okay.
You know, and again, I would make the comment that, you know, we talk about maximum, we talked about a maximum security versus a low security building. Generally, within the county jail world, the real question is what I'd call a secure building within which might be many custody levels, including minimum, or a non-secure building. And generally, and this has code implications as well, but generally speaking, a non-secure building is a building where people walk out of it. They can leave of their own accord. You know, I can put a camera on the door, I can put an officer watching the door, I can put an alarm on the door, but they go out. Secure building in the jail world, broadly speaking, is a building that you can't walk out of your own accord, but we have all custody levels in that building. And we design differently the housing for those different custodies.
Okay, more than 5 minutes is up.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Apologize. Thank you. Hope I didn't take your time.
I was going to ask some questions.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sandra Auten, AHTEN. You know, when you said earlier, whoever said it, that we have a low population of inmates compared to the population in the county, and that we likely can't improve on that, it's really obvious based on our services that we do have that we can improve on it. You know, when it's a 6-month wait to get into community elements, the mental health service, it becomes pretty obvious. There's some things that we can do better. There are a lot of things we can do better. We no longer have a detox center as of about 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. We got rid of the detox center. 10 or 15 years ago, we got rid of our halfway house where people re-entered the community. So I mean, that's just off the top of my head. And I'm a nobody. I'm not a professional. There are professionals in this area. There are people who know so much, and we could capitalize on that to come up with a plan, an option 3. You know, we've got option 1 and 2, and you guys, I can see you did a great job of figuring out within the scope of what you were asked to do, you did exactly what you should do. You laid out a couple of options, but to not go back and reconsider what the humane option is. You know, we have to opt out of being part of the prison industrial complex. We just have to do it. I wish it wasn't up to us. I know, don't just cross your arms. I'm talking to you. I wish it wasn't up to us. I wish we weren't part of this system that has done this atrocity of incarcerating so many of our human beings, fellow citizens. But we are part of it, and we're just this little county board, and I'm just this little person in the county. But but we have to do what we can do, and we have to treat people more humanely and not just find another way to feed into this larger system of believing that there is no redemption for people and that the answer to them is locking them up worse than we treat animals. We don't treat our pets the way we treat the human beings that we lock into these cells. It's atrocious. And I just urge you to pay attention to the brains that we have in this community and say, we will do better, we can do better, we can improve our rates of less incarceration. I know we can. We are not, you say that, you know, the richer populations do it and the more rural populations do it. Well, let's be the shining light for the average university town population and be better than that. We can be the ones that set the example and not just put more money into what is not the solution. I get that we have to fix some problems. We got a couple of $1 million worth of stuff that has to be fixed right now in order to get the jail up to livable conditions. But I am not going to sit back and let you sacrifice our public safety tax to more incarceration. And I don't think that the people of the county won't do it. They will not vote for that referendum. So get it off of your mind that it's going to happen. Nobody's going to. I'm so glad it came up to 34,000 so we have a leg to stand on. Because I think if it come up at 20 million, maybe people would go, well, you know, we can probably figure out how to do that over the next 20 years. But the price tag of 34 million, I was really happy to see it because I know I can get my constituents to say, no way are we paying that kind of money for a new jail. So let's think outside the box. Let's do the grant thing. Let's get the people who are the mental health. I'm so glad the 3 people spoke before me because they have the answers. You get the people who have researched the solutions to less incarceration in the same room and pay them the big bucks. Don't pay them the big bucks. They're going to do it for free, for God's sakes, because but pay them the money to do the studies to figure out how not to have it. One last closing thing I'll say, as I listened to the sheriff be interviewed on WEFT a couple of weeks ago, and the first question was, why do we need a new jail? And the first thing he said was about mental health services. And I just thought, I am not going to de facto sit here and say we are giving our mental health services over to the jail. That's not going to happen. I listened to it and I thought, Sandra, sit home, don't do it. Don't get re-involved. I've been involved in other social justice work before, and it takes a big chunk of your life to do it. I don't do it because I want to do it. I do it because what choice do I have when I'm thinking about the fact that we're going to allow our mental health services to be done at a jail? That makes no sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. J, are we at number 5? I've lost count. All right, thank you.
Hello. My name is Evelyn Reynolds, and I teach sociology at Parkland College here in Champaign. And my views do not represent Parkland College. They are representative of myself. And so one of the many things that could be commented on that I felt that I could specifically address is when the consultants talked about concern for the well-being of inmates. And I just found that to be kind of ironic because they're in jail. And and so I'm not sure how you could be concerned about the well-being of inmates when they're in jail and they're institutionalized and they're stigmatized and they're marginalized and ostracized. And I think it may be beneficial to talk to maybe some of the mental health experts in this room, and maybe some psychiatrists and psychologists and perhaps even sociologists about what it takes to enhance and improve a person's well-being. And I would say that most of those individuals, probably all, wouldn't say that putting them in jail will help their well-being, but it'll do the exact opposite. It'll be detrimental to their well-being. What if we took that $32 million or $34 million, give or take $5 or $6 million, and invested that into programs? And I disagree with what was said about programs being ineffective. I think that programs could be quite effective. I don't think that most people commit crimes because they just like to do it. They just long to go to jail. I think there are people that are desperate. There are people that need help. They're mentally ill. They're impoverished. They're isolated. They're marginalized. We could probably help those people. And this conversation about reducing jail size is happening in Washington. It's happening all over the country. It's happening in this local community. Why don't we pay consultants to figure out ways to reduce the jail population instead of building new jails? Why don't we engage in that sort of discussion that will actually help people in the long term? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 6.
I think you wanted to go last.
My name is Steve Beckett, B-E-C-K-E-T-T. I'm a law professor now, but I'm a lawyer. Don't hold that against me. I'm a former county board member. I was the facilities chair. So I have a couple things to say. First, about the process. I do applaud the team that you put together. I think they've done exactly what you asked them to do. And I would hope that county board members will be patient. I sort of got the heebie-jeebies when I'm sitting out there in the audience because it took me back to times when we constructed the courthouse, when we built the nursing home, when we built the highway garage. You know, there are stages in this process, and these folks represent one stage in the process. Many of the questions that you have now won't be answered until a later stage. Many of the questions happen at programming, and you get estimates. Many of them happen at schematic design, and you get further estimates. Some of them even happen at construction. So I think you just need to be patient. We as the public, we need you. We need you to see this process through. It's easy to immediately say no and come up with a reason to say no. We need you to keep an open mind that says yes is a possibility, and to listen at each of the stages to get us to the best result we possibly can, because I'll tell you what'll happen. What'll happen is we won't do anything, even though this was a problem that was there when I was facilities chair in 2010, and we just didn't do anything about it because we weren't ready to do anything about it. And so far, we haven't had the crisis that we had at the courthouse, where we had a court order that said, you better build a new courthouse or else. Or a crisis when we built the jail in the 1980s, where there was a court order that said, your jail's no good. And so we built a jail, but we were penny wise and pound foolish. We built a jail that wasn't good enough. It was too small. And we ended up taking people down to Coles County. And I had to drive down to Coles County to see people in jail. And we poured money out of this county down to Coles County where they could build a better jail for themselves. So don't be short-sighted about it. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, and the real reason why I came here wasn't for that. It was for what I see as are parallel tracks that will conjoin. The issue about pretrial services, the issue about detention, the issue about keeping people out of jail, that's absolutely valid. I mean, obviously, the people here, and there are a large segment of the public who feel that that is absolutely valid. And we need to study that, and that study can conjoin with this process at the right stage so that you end up with the facility that you need. I'm just counseling and asking you, don't build a jail that's too small so that we end up with the problem that we ended up in the 1980s. Don't automatically think that the jail has to be smaller than the 307 beds that they're talking about. I think that's an unwise decision right now. Don't think about it that way. I actually came here tonight because I met with Lynn Branham the other day, and she told me about this MacArthur grant. And quite coincidentally, I got an email from the Associate Dean for Research at the law school, Bob Lawson, who said, hey, Steve, why don't you do something about this MacArthur Research grant? And Lynn had asked me to come and consider sort of joining the team about the MacArthur Research Grant, and I was going to go, yeah, I need this like I need a hole in the head. But I really think it's a good idea. We really do have a need in this community to see what we can do in the way of pretrial services and in screening and risk screening and in diversion as well. We don't have a diversion program. I've said this to the state's attorney and to the assistants when they charge my clients all the time. Why don't you have a diversion program? Because we need a diversion program. But this MacArthur grant is a real opportunity. And Champaign County has all of the resources at the University of Illinois. We sent out emails, and I've received feedback from other departments, from sociology and College of Education, other places. Let's do that. Let's get Champaign County behind and become the grant applicant for this MacArthur Foundation grant. It's a good idea. I think it complements what you folks have on the table very, very, very well. And I promise to work with Lynn and see if we can't get it off the ground, but it ultimately will take your approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beckett. Can we assume that you're offering 2 of your research assistants to help us with the grant? You didn't.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
You don't know what you're saying sure to. I can see that.
Yes, research assistant. I've got law students who would love to help.
Okay, it's a deal.
My name is Eric Jacobson, ERIC, JAKOBSSON, and I serve on the Urbana City Council. I want to start by actually quoting candidate Petrie, as recorded in the News Gazette, who said, all the recent studies, national trends, conversations, the ILPP report, and the Community Justice Task Force report point us in the direction of the significance, efficiency, and efficacy of developing a comprehensive correctional service program. Not to have this conversation in conjunction with any decisions concerning jail construction, expansion, and/or closing, is a disservice to the taxpaying citizens of this county. And I'm absolutely certain that Chairperson Petrie agrees with candidate Petrie. And
It was a moment of sheer brilliance.
and the Urbana City Council is eager to help with this conversation. And to that end, the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole, which is exactly the same people as the council itself, passed a resolution last night to forward to the City Council, the same people, with a recommendation for approval at their meeting next week. In the interest of time and in the hope of, I'm going to, well, okay, I'm just going to read the whole thing, but I'll do it fast. Whereas statistics show that the United States incarcerates a far larger percentage of its residents than any other nation in the world, with a significant fraction of those incarcerated being detained prior to trial. And whereas recent evidence shows that excessive levels of incarceration is not contributing to the public safety, but on the contrary is needlessly damaging many lives, and whereas pretrial detention in the current bail system has been shown to be a burden to people of limited means, and whereas recent studies indicate that evidence-based risk assessment produces better outcomes for individuals brought into the justice system for a variety of lesser charges, and whereas excessive incarceration damages both the public and private economy, in addition to the human cost, and whereas the Champaign County Board is now considering plans for the construction of future jail facilities in Champaign County, therefore be it resolved that the Urbana City Council urges the Champaign County Board to work with other entities in Champaign County on planning for a substantial reduction in the number of people incarcerated in the county, strongly supports planning that includes provisions for alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders and people afflicted with mental health and substance abuse problems, strongly supports including the affected municipalities, law enforcement agencies, state's attorney's office, healthcare providers, and social service agencies in the planning, pledges on behalf of the City of Urbana to actively participate in such planning, urges that the planning for mental health services, substance abuse services, and appropriate treatment of nonviolent offenders be pursued with the same urgency, including the funding necessary for these plans to be implemented, as the planning for the physical upgrading of the jail and funding for the physical upgrading. So so with that, I guess I'm going to venture now. This is now me responding to a question about defining success. I would define success, I personally would define success as if any individual with mental health problems who has an encounter with our criminal justice system should have access to the very best mental health treatment. Every person with substance abuse problems who has an encounter with our criminal justice system should have access to the very best substance abuse treatment. Every nonviolent, low risk of every person who encounters the criminal justice system have a sufficiently speedy risk assessment to ensure that if they don't need to be detained, that they come back into the community sufficiently rapidly and under such circumstances as not to destroy their jobs, relationships, and home environment. So then I do have, finally, I don't have any time left. I do have a question for you to ponder. Probably I haven't left any time for you to answer it. But suppose that by some magic we could achieve these programmatic goals. Can you design to make those happen in the best possible way?
Thank you, Mr. Jacobson.
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, to be honest with you, but can you design to meet the needs of different populations? Yes.
Yeah, and
I don't know if that's the right answer. That's the question you're
I guess
asking.
the design is meet them from the perspective of the mental health issues, meet optimally from the mental health issues, optimally from the substance abuse issues, optimally from the situation of somebody who has just screwed up but isn't dangerous.
Yeah, well, of course, if you give a challenge to an architect, we'll say, yes, we can design any kind of condition that you want and need. And actually, what I was going to say, I was thinking of when somebody had made a comment before. If a person with a mental health or a substance abuse problem winds up in a facility, it is still a designed facility, whether it's a jail or whether you call it something else. The fundamental question, even if something like that, to me, winds up in a jail, is what is the nature of the design? Is the design responsive to the needs of the people, whatever kind of building it's in?
Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. Next person. Mr. J, what number do you, 8? There is no 8, so let's go to 9.
Yes, he had to leave, and so I'm taking his spot.
You are the substitute?
Yes, but I don't have his number because I think he took it with him.
We have it up here. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you. My name is Karen Medina, Medina. Okay. Get this out real fast, sorry. How long would your option 2 last before you think we would need to replace the building again? I would like to see your plans include conversion of the downtown jail into a mental health and drug rehab and outpatient facility for the county. Where in your diagrams are there spaces for guards to take their breaks and get some stress relief? Option 2 begins to allow for this. Space for guards and officers to research and discuss topics related to their jobs and team building. A built-in communication method for guards and officers to discuss their union concerns, especially their disappearing pension benefits. As a community, we all benefit from the civil servants being treated as people, doing their jobs well, and not be treated as throwaway. In other words, slave servants instead of public servants. Where is space for training? We want our guards to be well-trained, to have the best training and techniques that will keep them from having to use physical force, especially when the patients are acting erratically. We need regular training from psychiatric professionals for the officers and for the guards, since the guards are the only people who will be dealing with our mentally ill loved ones.
Karen,
Yes.
how many questions is that?
I'll continue, and you can answer them later. Access to exercise equipment for the guards preparing. I will send you a list. Access to exercise equipment for the guards preparing for their jobs, and again, releasing stress, because we don't want stressed guards. Space for handicapped and elderly patients. Women and men will be inmates here. I see a lot of line of sight coverage. Is there also ways to get privacy for the women and for men not to be exposing themselves? Isn't that why some of the men will be there in the first place, because of indecent exposure? How is line of sight going to not feed into that? Option 2, again, begins to allow for this because you had a separate section for women. Noise reduction, so inmates won't have to hear all the other patients' rantings and ravings. Cleaning staff, where will they work? What will the cost of cleaning the facilities be? Because that's another added cost of having a big facility. Supervisors in the same building. The guards will need to be able to have conversations with their supervisors. Good communication is vital for them doing their jobs. Option 2, again, slightly begins to allow for this. Space for the care teams of officer, guard, psychologist, medical care, so that they can discuss the patient's care plan. Space for the psychologist to talk to the patients. Access to test equipment so that they don't just come in with a clipboard. Office space for the in-house psychologist where records can be kept safe. Inpatient services. Library so that people can improve themselves while rotting in jail. Psychiatric units, space for 24-hour non-acute residential rehabilitative and clinical care space for mental health residential rehabilitation treatment programs. A pharmacy, space for special activities for those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, appropriate accommodations for delivery of patients and their clinical needs, because privacy, dignity, and security are a high priority for the patients. Since the nonviolent patients won't be staying long, where's the space for covered circle drive where they can be picked up? Recovery is promoted not only in the therapeutic program, but also in the facility design, patient care areas that incorporate natural light, access to exterior environments, color, art, pleasant furnishings, and other components of a warm environment have been shown to advance healing and recovery. Additionally, promoting positive socialization and engagement while also providing opportunities for controlling one's social environment is critical to successful treatment and the recovery process. Private treatment areas for individual therapy, family therapy, group rooms, day community areas, and family visiting areas are all important in the treatment process. In addition, having offstage areas for staff to report their duties and responsibilities is also important. Basically, what I'm really trying to say here is that I am really sorry that we, the county, hired you to put all those requirements into a jail. What we really need is, one, a mental health and drug rehab center separate from the jail, a place where we can get some real help, find real solutions, and avoid the need to put our nonviolent citizens in jail. We do need a little jail for violent crimes. So, two, a little jail that is a good working environment for the guards, police, and their managers to work as a team with outside professionals, and training space, vital for the people, not robots with high-tech equipment, but people who are staff and are valued for their training and their intelligence to work at the jail. We asked you for a jail to incarcerate the mentally ill. We should not have done that. We should have asked you to design a rehab center and a separate jail, if that's what we want, a separate jail.
Thank
we
you.
need the rehab center. The only
Karen.
way the public will approve a tax increase is if both of these needs are to be met. Treatment programs, a community resource center separate from the jail, and success would be zero mentally ill and addiction issues in our jail.
Thank you, Karen. Don't worry about answering those right now. I think we got the picture that it's a goal for a mental health facility. 9? Okay, number 10?
Good evening. My name is Bruce Swardini, S-U-A-R-D-I-N-I, and the CEO of Prairie Center Health Systems here in Champaign County. I first want to say that I kind of go by the Serenity Prayer, so I can kind of, think of where you guys are at, but trying to find that wisdom is key here tonight, isn't it? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit. First of all, I want to commend Lynn and Council Beckett with their information and their ability probably to help you with looking at applying for the MacArthur Foundation grant money. I think it's wise and I think it's really needed. So I would hope that any energy could be expended would go towards that cause. I also want to call to your attention that I was on the planning task force that we concluded and gave to you this report, and it just seems kind of odd that we gave you this task force recommendations back in June of 2013 already. But I want to zero in on a couple of things that I think are key here. And I'm only going to speak on the program side. I think that you've got enough information about the whole issue of capital improvement. I don't think, at least I can't speak for other people. I can only say that I think there's a definite need there, and I would vote for an increase to help in capital improvement. Well, I'm here to talk about the program side, and because I thought that was mentioned by Chris. And I think that it's key here that when it was mentioned that it was only about $550,000 that was directed towards programming towards this side of the equation, that a lot more money ought to be given to that. That's less than 0.1%. Of a total budget that you're looking at, $32 million to build. We need to start beginning to look at setting our priorities, again, going back to what Lynn is talking about, a master plan that would include facility planning as well as program planning. One of the things that had happened in this county, and I was not proud of doing, was closing down the detox program for Champaign County. I did that twice. I did that in 2008, and I did it again in 2010. The state of Illinois has reneged on substance abuse services. Since I took the CEO leadership in 2007, we have dropped from $110 million to $60 million. And another guy by the name of Bruce, that's in the papers lately, is going to drop that figure another third. We are going to take about a $23 million hit, again, if the governor's plan goes forward in 2016. That roughly equates to another $350,000 for Prairie Center, and we will have lines waiting to get into our doors. I know that when we closed detox in 2010, we were serving roughly about 800 people at that time. And since then, that was a medically monitored program that we had law enforcement, we had the hospitals, we had mental health, and such, referring to our detox program because of the need. Since 2012, or 10, when we closed it, that gap is just exponentially widened open in this community. If you are in need of detox, and I hope that you're not, or a loved one isn't, but if you are in need of detox today, you will have to drive over 85 miles to get services. Now, when I ask you if you had a heart attack, would you jump in your car and go 85 miles to a hospital? I don't think so. You want the resources as close to your community as possible. When a person really reaches out and is in need of help for detox, they need it now. You have to be available. That is the entryway for people to recover. If that door is not open and you're ready, you will continue to use. What we have seen over the past 4 to 5 years is a constant erosion of the money, and we were the last program in the state to close the medical detox model. In doing so, I was also on the state task force that studied detox in the state of Illinois. In that, we looked at 10 hospitals in the Chicago area, of which the average cost for detox was $700 to $1,000 a day. Most detoxes run about 3 to 5 days worth of treatment. We were getting $200 a day here in Champaign County from the state. And I made it known to the state officials, meet me halfway. Meet me at $400 or $500. I think we can put a facility together. In that course of time, I also had a task force that was made up of the sheriff. We had both hospitals, and we had mental health. We had the 708 board, and we studied the issue. And after a year and a half, we finally got approval from the legal counsel with President's Hospital that we were going to have the entire fourth floor of President's Hospital dedicated to the detox services. Only to come at the last minute in June of this year when the CEO, Mike Brown, left, and the interim CEO that's now there could not make the decision for detox to be open. I will be going tomorrow to Peoria, and I'll be looking at the model in Peoria that seems to be quite successful. But I really encourage that any type of planning that goes on towards the facility development, that you also look at detox as being part of that program plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swardini. Yes, I think 11 is coming.
Good evening. My name is Valerie Ammons, A-M-M-O-N-S, and I am of the human race. I sit here before you and I see all these beautiful people, and I am just in awe that we all should want the same thing, and that's what's best for this community. And spending $32 million on a jail is not what's best for this community. What's best for this community is to educate this community. When you educate the community, you build the community. And when you build the community, you build the one race that we all are of a part of, the human race, which will be success for us all. There are so many things that this community needs other than spending $32 million in one asset, one facet. We need to spend money on education, education, education. We need to spend money on job training and better jobs. We need to spend money on mental health facilities and substance abuse facilities. We need to change the policies. How do we change the policies in our police? How do they police the community? We educate and we train how to know what the cultural differences are in this multicultural community that we live in. And this is the only way that we're going to be able to do it, is to educate. Half of the people that are incarcerated in Champaign County, they are Black. So why is that? Are we not looking and taking into consideration all of these cultural things that are different between one another? Are we just saying, oh, here he is and he did that? And it might be something just as simple as you misunderstanding. We need to educate and train and educate and train. And that's the way that we can build. If we stay stagnant on not educate and think we can just throw them in the jail and lock them up, then we're going to all be thrown in the jail. And what is our future going to be like? If we don't educate this future, what are you going to do? Keep building jails on every corner? There'll be a jail? No. There needs to be school, better teachers, qualified teachers here. We asked the county board not to spend all of your money on jails, but to spend money thinking about what can I provide the best quality here in this beautiful community that we live in. To spend the money on education and building things in the community, building better schools, expanding the library, getting mentors, building things such as that, and to figure out why there's an excessive number of Blacks being jailed. Why is that? Is that our failure? Is that our failure? This is the community that we live in. So we have to take some responsibility for its ups and downs. So how do you do that? You take a good look at yourself. You take a good look at the things that's in the community. Are you offering the best things? Have you done any research to see what communities in the United States of America or abroad that is educating and they have a quality education system and their jail population has decreased? Find that place, research that place, and then put that into place here and see if it'll work for here. If it'll work there, the possibilities that it will work here. If we fail our children, we might as well be a ghost town, because that is what's going to happen here in Champaign-Urbana. This is a beautiful place. I moved here from Chicago 35 years ago, and I would never go back to Chicago to live. I love it here. But I want to see it improve and be that beautiful place that it can be. And it's going to take all of us to do that. All of us. So I ask you, please, County Board, don't spend all of your money there. Look into finding places that have actually educated their community and their community is thriving. Because when we are successful, this community will be a success, and then we will build a better world, and we will all profit and benefit from it if we do one thing: stay together as one. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ammons.
Hello, I'm Stuart Leedy. Thanks for the chance to do this. I do have a couple of sets of questions for you. Maybe the first one that might be helpful to the board is, so people have been talking about what are we on the hook for maintenance costs? I mean, with computer equipment, you might expect to spend 10 or 15% of its capital cost per year in maintenance. I'm wondering, can you give a similar rule of thumb for jail construction? What should we expect what should the county board expect to spend on long term on a building to keep it from falling apart as the current buildings do?
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I think most of it's like in the mechanical systems we talked about, where you're doing pulleys and belts and filters and
roofs,
lubrication and repairing roofs and repairing caulk. like that. I'm not sure what that number would be.
I can tell you from the mechanical side of the world, the HVAC systems, the plumbing systems, things like that. We're looking at geothermal systems. We're proposing those for the new construction.
Okay,
Those tend
what,
to have very low maintenance costs
Is he on?
in comparison with other systems. So what that number is, you know, is dollar-wise, I couldn't tell you that as I sit here talking to you.
do you feel that you're on the hook to tell the county board that as part of this process?
Probably not this stage. Remember we said this is more at the needs assessment state. There hasn't been final designs of mechanical systems, boilers, that's all not been designed yet. That's out in the future, kind of like Mr. Beckett said. Got to be patient with the process because those things are still out there to be determined.
Okay. I guess, I think I have to take a line from Mr. Keebler, who isn't standing there anymore, and ask you if you can judge, you know, how do you think the success of this planning project should be judged? I mean, the county board at this point finds itself, you were asked to provide up to 3 proposals, and you provided 2, which are rather similar. Well, they're matched in jail population, which, as far as I can see from the contract, was not a requirement. There's nothing that says that. You were supposed to analyze what was there and what has been studied so far, and you did. But you provided 2 proposals that are really quite similar in terms of kind of bells and whistles and overall jail population. So how is the county board supposed to go forward and consider, well, you know, what if indeed it were possible to, by use of other programs, to reduce the jail population by 25%, as Governor Rauner has suggested should be a target? How differently would you design the jail in that case? It seems like at this point, the train is already gone. You've already got the sort of sketch as to how large the whole facility should be, targeted to some number of people, which should be very much up in the air. That's one question. Another is, Dottie Vora-Weiss had mentioned several lines on which you might have buildings that were external to the jail, and you dismissed them saying, well, you know, any such buildings would have to be staffed around the clock. That's certainly not true, depending on the use of the buildings. You know, if you were going to have something that was dedicated to family visits or other special programming things, that would not have to be staffed around the clock. There's other things that certainly would only have to be staffed while they were in use and might not be used at other times. So it's a very, you know, so you're dismissing with a wave of the hand things that, at best, this is a lack of imagination, and at worst, it seems like you're offering the county board a pig in a poke, and I think you really should feel defensive about that. I'd like to hear what you might have to say.
I feel like we did a good job. We met the mission that we have, and I don't feel defensive at all.
Would you like to say anything more?
I'm not sure all the questions that were in there.
Okay. Well, how about a specific one?
Well, you talked about the options.
Yeah.
If you had seen the presentation, maybe you missed it. Initially, we actually did have another option on the table, which was to renovate the downtown jail.
Yeah.
So that was taken off the table based on the Part 1 findings. So we had 3 options, but one was taken off the table by the board.
Okay, but none of the options considered alternate jail populations. So I guess the big question, which either I could ask you, I mean, I don't expect you to come up with an answer on the top of your head, but how differently, how much less expensive would the jail be if you expected a 25% reduced jail population? And one caveat about that is that you design so that peaks are not exceeded, but if occasionally a peak were exceeded, you know, it's inconvenient but not impossible to send inmates to other jails for brief periods of time. The peaks were pretty sharp. So anyway, how different would the design be if you were aiming for a significantly lower jail population?
Well, first off, it's hard to say. That wasn't our mission. So I mean, that to a certain degree, it's an irrelevant question. Our mission wasn't to consider alternatives to incarceration. That's why you had the ILPP study. That's what that was supposed to do for you. Ours was to do the master plan facility that was recommended by them and NIC, which is what we did. Now, as far as, you know, what would alternatives do? Well, it depends on which populations are being removed. as I mentioned before to the lady that was up here, when you design a secure facility, I know we had the term bandied about that they're maximum security. Well, that's really a misnomer. You know, in a prison system, they have so much population that there legitimately are maximum security facilities in one place, medium in another, minimum in a third. In a county jail, you have all custody levels. So you design differently for different populations. There's different responses, different degrees of hardness, different degrees of softness, different materials chosen, different door types, different lock types. There's a lot of variety in a well-designed jail. One of the comments we made about the jails we had here was was a distinct uniformity in the way everything was designed. There basically is no distinction of any significance in the satellite jail between the different housing units, and there's no distinction in the downtown jail and the difference in the units. So it's a misconception to say that everything is alike in a jail. In fact, it shouldn't be that way. So when you talk about alternatives, the question is, who is the alternative removing?
Yes.
And so without getting to that point, you can't really answer that question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. It is now time to close the 60 minutes of public participation for this study session. I appreciate everybody who came this evening and shared their thoughts and questions with all of us and the questions of the county board. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Ms. Bergson, Mr. McGuire, second the motion. All those in favor say aye. No discussion, I can tell. Thank you, everyone. Good night.